We're going to convene the State Allocation Board. We're still lacking a quorum, so we'll have to get started as a subcommittee. And so as a subcommittee, I thought we could start with our reports, which won't require votes. And then if we still don't have a quorum, but we think we're going to get one, we could even go into the items that require votes and have the discussion and then have members add on. We have a lot on this agenda, and we should try to get as much done as we can. So we're going to spare the roll call since we know we don't have a quorum. Let's go right. First of all, let me just ask the members of the committee here and the public, are there any questions, comments, corrections, or concerns for the minutes that we have? We'll check again with our board members before we vote on anything. But is there anybody here that had any concern with the minutes today? Okay. Ms. Moore? Do you want us to move approvals and then leave the roll call open? Or we can't make motions until we have a quorum. Okay. Wish we could, but we can't. Executive Officer Statement. Mr. Cook.
Thank you. I have a couple of items for the board today. And first of all, at our last meeting, Dick McCarthy of the Seismic Safety Commission addressed the board in addition regarding an early earthquake warning system. The board directed that we draft a letter in support of their grant proposal for an ARA grant for that system. That letter was issued to the Seismic Safety Commission in support of their grant application. Also, current bond rating for the state of California, I would say the good news for the current bond rating of the state of California is that it's stabilized in the wake of the budget. The bad news is it's stabilized at the lowest level in the nation for a state. The Treasurer's Office will soon be out looking for billions of dollars of cash flow borrowing. And then when that is settled, and we'll see how successful that is, the plans are to access the credit markets for general obligation bonds in the coming months. But we're taking a wait-and-see attitude on how approach on what they can do. Also, the first audit subcommittee meeting was held on August 11th. To discuss the Office of Public School Construction's Audit Authority. Presenters included State Auditor Elaine Howell, OPSC staff, a representative from the California Department of Education, as well as a number of stakeholders. And just to note, recent improvements to our audit procedures include additional audit staff training and incorporation of field audits into our audit program. And then lastly, touch on furloughs. This is the first board meeting after a full cycle of 3 furlough days per month. We are still coming to grips with the loss of productivity that comes in the wake of that. We're losing 36 work days a year. Senator Cheney described it yesterday as, if you work through Halloween, you take the rest of the year off, is basically the impact of that. And our internal deadlines, we're kind of getting crunched on.
Rob, I don't want you getting any ideas.
Mm-hmm. We were thinking of throwing a heck of a Halloween party, and then, but anyway. We're still trying to figure out how we have fairly aggressive internal deadlines that we try to meet to put together board all the items that you have before you, and they're pretty tough under the furlough condition. They're pretty tough to meet. And we're going to have to reassess those. So,
there may be some board member comment on this. I'd like to go first and just say that I think the board members come from different institutions. You have members from the Assembly, from the Senate, from the Superintendent of Public Instruction, the Department of General Services, the Department of Finance, and from the general public. And I just want to say that I'm quite aware of the impact of the furloughs. And I think we all need to be very sensitive to the fact that the furlough impact is real. It's not just that the staff does the same amount of work in less days for less pay. I mean, there really is an impact on workload. I know at the Department of Finance, We're still struggling with how to manage it. It's not easy, and I know that for the legislative members and the superintendent, they don't have the furlough situation yet, so they may not be facing that directly with their staffs. But I would urge you to be sensitive to that issue with the state staff that are subject to the furlough. I think that it is a real management challenge to try to move this work forward and also meet the furlough requirements, which of course are a great burden on everybody. But this is the situation we find ourselves in. So I appreciate that, Rob, and please let your staff know that we appreciate the work that they do. We want them to do as much work as they can to move this agenda forward, but I'm going to ask all of my colleagues to try to understand that we can't get as much done as we might like, that we do have some new limitations. Mr. Harvey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I too am sensitive to what you must be confronting, Rob, and something that we did when I was on the City Council in Southern California City, and to a lesser degree when I served on the Teacher Credentialing Commission, was for the Chief Executive Officer of those institutions to present to us as a policy board a 90-day calendar. And that calendar was a way of saying, over the next 3 meeting dates, here are the kinds of things we want to accomplish. Here's what staff believes are the priorities of your body. And it was a working document that the board got to make comment on. And it seems to me that maybe one of the things you might consider doing is having something like that for us. I know you have an internal document that you must use as your guidance to prepare things for board consideration, but it may be that here is what we think is a reasonable number of items to get through in the next month meeting. And if the board wants to move things around, let's do so, but to move, you got to take something off the one you're impacting and replace it with something else. And it gives us a sense not only what you're trying to do, it gives us a validation of the priorities, but it may also, in the case of furloughs, be something that says, this is it. And if you really want to change the agenda, you got to take something off and move it to an out agenda. I mean, that's one way of helping to preserve the integrity of the agenda and be respectful of your time. It's just a suggestion.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Harvey. Are there other comments from board members this afternoon?
I just I would support that. And I think that could be a document that the board then is helping with the priorities of, to me, the items such as appeals and regulatory change that seem to have a large impact. There's a large impact of the agenda that we don't see all the work behind because it moves so easily, I think, as we approve the consent calendar, which has a tremendous amount of work. But how we prioritize our time and staff time, I think, would be a very valid thing to do at the board level.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Moore. Okay, seeing no... Oh, yes, Senator Torkelson.
Question regarding the funding sources behind this. This is not to go into detail today, but general fund that go forward without.
Rob, do you want to go ahead and respond to Mr. Torkelson? Then I'd like to add something to that.
We're subject to the executive order, which simply institutes furlough days across the board.
But you have, how much of your budget is fee-based or non-general fund-based?
Virtually almost every dollar of our budget is actually funded from the bonds. There is a very small component of a general fund that's there for the the emergency repair program. The rest of it is out of the bonds itself. There is almost no impact on the general fund. But.
Senator Torkelson, may I also, with your permission, I'd like to also respond. I know your question was addressed to Mr. Cook and OPSC, but in my capacity, I've had this question come up a number of times from both from other legislators and from other stakeholders in different state programs. And the question is, why has the furlough been extended to all state departments under the governor's control, including those that are special funded? And there's two very important reasons why it has. The first one is that becomes a distortion in the employment marketplace issue. If we have associate government program analysts at the Department of Social Services that get 14% less than the associate government program analysts at the Department of Transportation because Caltrans is funded from the state highway account, not the general fund, then we create this incentive for experienced program analysts to leave DSS, and we need them there to go over to Caltrans. So we create these employment distortions, and so that's one issue. From a financial standpoint, exclusively a financial standpoint, a much more important issue in my mind, obviously being from finance, is that the state's problem, as we all know, is not just a severe budget problem, but it's also a severe cash problem. In fact, our cash reserves are the lowest in the state, consistently lowest in the state that they have been in 7 decades. In fact, I checked the cash balance of the general fund before I came over here today, and it was about negative $14 billion. In fact, if you ask John Chung, our state controller, he'll tell you that the state of California has not had a positive cash balance since July of 2007. So it's now been 25 months since we've actually had a positive cash balance in our state general fund. So that begs the obvious question, if the general fund's in a negative cash balance, how are we operating? And the way we're operating is mostly on borrowed money. We're borrowing from the highway account, the motor vehicle account, all of the different special funds that exist in state government. We're borrowing their money to pay the day-to-day bills for the vendors that we need to pay. Of course, the controller hopes to stop issuing IOUs. He had to actually start issuing IOUs because even that wasn't enough money to meet the cash needs. But in order to meet payroll and the day-to-day cash requirements of state government, we've had to borrow internally every single cent that's not nailed down. And so on that level, the furloughs is saving a tremendous amount of money in special funds, which then makes itself available for borrowing for cash management purposes. And that does tie directly back to the state budget, because the more money we can borrow internally means the smaller RAND that we have to issue. Eventually, if we can get our credit rating good enough to issue RANDs, then the smaller the RAND that we issue, the less interest we pay, and that comes directly out of the general fund budget. So it is all connected. And I appreciate your frustration with it, and I know there are many people outside of government that are frustrated that the agencies they have to deal with are closed on 3 Fridays a month, but that is the reason why we're doing it, is total cash management as well as personnel issues related to the employment distortions I talked about. And I fully respect the constitutional officers have their own view on this, and we are trying to resolve those issues in a different venue, and they'll play themselves out eventually.
That was a very thorough explanation, and I appreciate it. And I'm sure we all have our various levels of frustration over it. And when I was on the County Board of Supervisors, we hit economic hard times, and there was a distinction between departments that were fee-based and departments that weren't. So Public Works kept going ahead because we wanted to keep construction jobs going and keep those infrastructure projects going. That could be done in this situation. It could be a distinction. It's not being done. The cash flow issue is a new overlay dimension, and it's at some point there's probably a calculus. Don't know where it is and whether Rob could find it, and you in finance could help find it, where slowing down construction projects versus speeding up construction projects has a calculus on the budget too, in terms of revenues that could come from the jobs, the income tax, the turnover in the economy. So I don't know to what degree that's being looked at, but once we get through the next borrowing, perhaps in the next couple of months, we'll see it clearly, more clearly where the calculus is and where there may be able to be some distinctions of allowing some of the fee-based agencies to keep going. And maybe Rob could keep an eye on to what degree is the slowdown, the lack of time, going to result in less projects going out the door.
I think that's an excellent suggestion. Let's be prepared to report back on any changes in the status quo, Rob.
That's fine. Thank you.
Welcome, Senator Hancock.
Do we have now? We've achieved quorum.
Thank you. One more. All right. Thank you all.
So we have a quorum.
Yep.
Excellent. Ms. Genera. Sorry, did I get that right?
Genera.
I'm sorry, Ms. Genera, will you please call the roll?
Senator Lowenthal? Senator Hancock?
Here, and let me just say, Senator Lowenthal and I were both in
Senator Wyland. Assemblymember Fuller. Assemblymember Brownlee.
Here.
Assemblymember Torlakson.
Here.
Scott Harvey.
Present.
Kathleen Moore.
Here.
Rosario Gerard. Tom Sheehy.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Great, thank you, Ms. Genera. Okay, so Senator Hancock and I believe Assemblymember Brownlee, before you walked in, I asked the board members, the subcommittee, if they had any questions, corrections, or comments about the minutes. And seeing none, and the public already had a chance to weigh in, is there a motion to approve our minutes?
So moved.
All in favor? Aye. Minutes are approved. We've had our executive officer statement. We have a quorum here. Let's move to the consent calendar.
Okay. The consent calendar is ready for your approval.
Are there any questions or comments about the consent calendar? Any comment from the general public? Ms. Brownlee.
Thank you for calling on me right away, Mr. Chair.
I'm working on it, but keep me honest.
I just noticed on the consent agenda, there's an emergency repair for a swimming pool at Sacramento Charter High School. And it just, I've never, my staff or I have not seen a swimming pool in the emergency repair program, and just wondered if that was typical or not.
Rob?
I'll ask Masha Lutzuk to come up and...
Better not be funded with our monies. Vice President Biden said no swimming pools.
There you go.
Thank you. Masha Lutzuk, Office of Public School Construction. We have had a couple more swimming pool projects that the board has previously approved. And typically the health and safety on those projects that makes them eligible is related to deteriorated plumbing associated with the pools and bad surfaces. The ERP does not limit funding to any type of facilities as long as these are the facilities at the school site that the pupils are using. And this is actually a very good program for districts to get funding for swimming pools because other programs have restrictions on funding that particular type of facility.
So that is the case in this particular item. It is piping and health and safety issue.
I think there was more than one, but I think piping was one of them, the plumbing for the swimming pool.
Thank you.
Were there other questions from board members or any requests from board members to take anything off the consent calendar?
I just want to note for the record that I will be voting for the consent calendar with the exception of the Elk Grove item that I think will require another vote.
Is it okay, Ms. Moore, if we separate the question?
Yes.
Okay. Is there a motion to approve the entire consent calendar minus any projects that impact the Elk Grove Unified School District?
So moved.
Second. We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Is there a motion to approve the projects on the consent calendar that impact the Elk Grove School District?
So moved.
Second. Roll call vote. Oh, we can't approve it. We only got 6. We're not going to have 6 votes. Okay.
You can hold that open.
Okay.
That issue open.
We're going to hold the roll open on the consent calendar for the Elk Grove Unified School District issues. I apologize. Let's call the roll. I'm sorry. Yes, Counsel. I'm sorry.
Exception to that rule that, you can't normally vote on something that you felt you had a conflict with, but if it is a necessity in order to go forward with it, you can. However, in this instance, I understand Senator Lowenthal, so it's the board's pleasure.
Can we wait until towards the end of the meeting, and if it becomes apparent that it can't be approved without that necessity vote, then I would do so.
Ms. Genera, can you call the roll, and then we'll hold the item open for an add-on?
Please turn it off. Sorry, go ahead.
What are we voting on?
We're voting on the portion of the consent calendar that had Elk Grove Unified School District projects on it. Ms. Moore did not want to vote on those because she has a conflict.
So we just voted for the entire consent
Minus
calendar,
those.
minus that. Now we're voting on
Correct.
which ones to come.
Correct.
Senator Hancock? Assemblymember Brownlee?
Aye.
Assemblymember Torlakson?
Aye.
Scott Harvey.
Aye.
Kathleen Moore.
Abstain.
Tom Sheehy.
Aye. Okay, that has 5 votes. We'll leave the roll open, and Ms. Jenner, please make sure we come back to that before this meeting's over, preferably when Mr. Lowenthal arrives. Okay. Now, we've got the consent calendar passed. Now, at 2 meetings ago, the board requested that we have the Inspector General, Laura Schick, the new Inspector General, Laura Schick, come talk to the board about her role in state government and with ARA, and to talk about audits to the extent that we want to get into the weeds. We can get into the weeds with Ms. Schick, or we can stay at a policy level. But we do have her here, and I think since we have a quorum, it would be appropriate now for her to come forward. So, Laura, could you please come forward?
Yeah, I'll look it over.
Button is on your right.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Sheehy, and I want to take this opportunity to thank all the members of the State Allocation Board for inviting me here today. I know you all know that government often operates in silos where we don't talk across lines and over departments to each other, so I really welcome the opportunity to engage in a discussion with you today. My mission is very simple. It is to detect, deter, and disclose waste, fraud, or abuse in the expenditure of any recovery dollars here in the state of California. We are, as you probably already know, receiving over $50 billion in recovery dollars here in California. Our local school districts have already received approximately $3.7 billion of recovery money. Unfortunately, the FBI has pointed out to me multiple times that we are likely to experience or could experience anywhere between 7 to 10% fraud. That's not counting mistakes or waste. And I know for all of us it's a totally unacceptable figure. My focus right now is on the deterrence phase, on the prevention. And to that end, first I went to Washington and met with all of the federal inspectors general of departments that are distributing recovery dollars. I've met with the 4 California U.S. attorneys, local district attorneys, mayors, local auditors, and controllers to coordinate our oversight. None of us want to be bumping into each other or replicating or spending $1 more than we need to on oversight. To that end, we have put together, I think, the first in the nation, very comprehensive fraud detection and prevention training. We put that training on here in Sacramento several weeks ago. I want to thank the board for sending some of your staff to it. We had about 400 state employees in that training, and we're now taking it on the road to San Diego, San Francisco, Los Angeles, for both state employees and for local employees and recipients of recovery dollars. What else? I think that's about it for now in terms of what I'm up to, and I'm here ready to answer questions if you have them.
Laura, I'd like to break the ice with the first question. Could you talk a little bit on how you see your role intersecting, if at all, with the state school facilities program, given that we're using state bond funds? Could you comment on that?
Yeah, I actually at this point don't see an overlap. I mean, the final verdict is still out in terms of the Build America bonds and what accountability and overlap there might be with the transparency and reporting rules of the Recovery Act. But I'm leaving that up to the lawyers, and it's very unclear at this point. So I don't see really an overlap, other than I think we all care about transparency and accountability of public dollars.
Questions of the board. Ms. Brownlee.
I was just interested in the statistic that you gave that the FBI said 7 to 10% in waste, fraud, and abuse. And is
Fraud
that
only.
Oh, fraud.
Yeah.
So is that a statistic that comes from government agencies only?
No. It comes from private sector and government. when there are large infusions of federal dollars. Unfortunately, the aftermath of Katrina in Louisiana, the figure was a heart-stopping 17% fraud. But I think they're looking at large defense contracts, during time of war and military confrontation. I think just in general, that's the number that both the U.S. attorneys and FBI keep quoting to me, 7 to 10%.
And is there a breakdown between corporations, government, difference?
I don't know that, Assembly Member, exactly, but based on other information I'm getting, I really think it's predominantly with contractors and vendors rather than inside government that the predominant amount of fraud takes place, and maybe we in government can deal with some of the inefficiency stuff. But, I'm looking everywhere and anywhere for where it might occur so we can stop it.
Great. Thank you very much.
Mr. Harvey.
Very quickly, I know you had a conflict when our subcommittee discussing audits at OPSC had its August 11th hearing. We had I think, a wonderful opportunity to kind of get a picture of what audits are supposed to accomplish, kinds of best practices in audits, the role audits play in transparency and objectivity and independence, those kinds of things. But if you have just a few comments about what you see the value of audits and why there are audits, because frankly, there is a healthy tension between OPSC and local school districts on what we do and how we do it. And Rob alluded to the fact that we are changing our template, if you will. But any guidance or comment you would have about what audits should include, and I know you have a wealth of experience from the local level where you conducted audits when you were in LA as the controller, and now you're charged with doing aura specific, but I'd appreciate hearing briefly from you what you have to say about audits.
I'd be happy to, and I've also heard some of the conversation going on around audits of local school districts. Certainly in my experience, I've heard lots of complaints from the entities being audited. And in my role now, I'm very sensitive to hearing from state departments who are groaning under the weight of furloughs, hard financial times, and Recovery Act dollars coming in and lots of audits. But I think almost from my standpoint, it's better to be over-audited than under-audited, that under the lead of our government in Washington and our newly elected president, I believe we're entering an era of increased accountability and transparency, that's what the public wants. And if anything, here at state government, we should be hard at work trying to rebuild the public's trust and confidence that government can do things right. One way to show them that we can do things right is through audits that deliver on transparency and accountability and ensure the taxpayers that their dollars are being spent wisely and well. That's a very general statement, but I have heard that first of all, there's always resistance to change. And I understand that the Office of Public Schools Construction, after recommendations from entities such as outside auditors, the Department of Finance Office of Audits and Evaluations, the Little Hoover Commission, which has done two reports, one on bond accountability and one several years ago of SAB, called for exactly what OPSC is doing, which is to have a more robust audit shop and to look more closely at local school districts in terms of what they've been doing with state bond money, and in particular with the excess money. So I applaud their efforts, and I think it's going to go a long way towards ensuring that these dollars, which are in the multiple billions, are being spent in the way intended and are delivering important things to our children, our teachers, our families, and our taxpayers.
Ms. Moore.
Ms. Chick, thank you very much for being here today. I just wanted to ask you to follow up a little bit on where you see no overlap. Does that mean that as we're functioning with our program here today, that you don't see and that the Inspector General would be involved in that? What do you mean by no overlap?
Well, that until there's clarification on the Build America bonds, I do not think it's yet in my purview to be exercising oversight of the dollars that you're expending because they're state bond dollars. But let me inject a caveat in that. When people come to me with issues or concerns or problems, I certainly will seek to turn to the proper authorities to address those concerns. So if somebody brought an issue to me about something to do with state bond school construction dollars, I would want to make sure that their concerns got addressed by the proper authorities.
And would that be bond funds that were done under the Build America bond piece? Because we have a number of bond funds.
No, not only. I mean, in my role here, if concerns and problems about public dollars are brought to me, I would want to hook that concerned party up with the proper authorities, whether it's Build America bonds or state school construction bonds, or I can't think of other examples because I'm here today, but any public dollars. I would want to direct them to the right source. So I'll give you an example. I heard some concerns about the fact that the Office of School Construction auditors were, for the past 2 years, having difficulty proceeding with an audit of state bond dollars inside a school district. And I picked up the phone and called the superintendent of that school district to say, is this the case that your folks are not letting in state auditors? That would be an example.
So the Inspector General position is more than the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act dollars in the state of California?
No, I don't think that's what I said.
Well, I'm aware of that situation, but was that, I don't think that was American Recovery and Reinvestment Act dollars.
No, what I just explained was if I hear a concern from someone about public dollars, public state dollars, I want to make sure that that concern gets communicated to the right source. And that call to the school superintendent was exactly that. I would be remiss as a public official if I had not conveyed that.
I think I also, as a member of the State Allocation Board, believe that it's our responsibility, too, that our bond funds are expended correctly.
Well, I agree, and I very much look to work closely with you to that end.
Ms. Moore, did you have more?
There was one question. Oh, yes, the fraud issue. I just wanted to, I've been involved in this system for over 20 years, both as a practitioner and now at the Department of Education and representing the superintendent. I've not been aware of a fraud case that has been brought before in the school facilities program. And I was interested, Rob, if you were aware of any fraud cases that we have had before this board in any of the school facility programs.
Well, I can name one case in particular where the board itself directed staff to alert the Attorney General as well as the local DA on a district that had conducted activities that were in...
Was there fraud found there?
Excuse me, I want to interject for a second. Since I don't know the background on this and the other board members don't, no, that's okay. You can have the discussion. But I would ask you not to name names. I have no idea who you're talking about. And if it's that important, we could always set up a closed session agenda. But since we don't know who it is in the background, just don't name names. But go ahead, Rob.
No, and nor was I intending to. But there was a district that had engaged in a pattern of behavior completely disregarding statute regulations in this program that ultimately the board itself, and this goes back some years, but the board directed staff to contact the Attorney General, contact the local DA, and ask them to investigate the matter.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I do want to reiterate that in terms of my purview over recovery dollars, I'm not just looking for fraud, waste, inefficiency, mistakes, abuse. Anything that's not promoting spending money wisely and well and according to rules and regulations.
Ms. Moore?
Well, I think what school districts will want to know is kind of how does that process work, and how do we tell them, you know, this is an additional layer or not. We don't know yet. I think you said that you're really looking at the legal piece of the Build America bonds and consulting with attorneys on that. But ultimately, I always know school districts would like to know how does that process look, and what can they expect, and what are the perhaps rules of the road ahead for them, so that they can properly be prepared beyond, I guess, where they are prepared now in terms of the audit procedures and process that they go through and the approval processes that they go through before the state allocation board. So any information about that would be, I think, great for the school districts and other local education agencies that participate in this program.
Absolutely, and I would say at this point, school districts are receiving recovery dollars. The school construction dollars in the Build America is the question mark. But the $3.7 billion figure that I quoted are recovery dollars, and those do come under the jurisdiction of my office. And in terms of any rules and guidelines, the number one thing that I would say for school districts right now is the U.S. Department of Education is issuing and has issued guidelines, and so those are the ones to very much pay attention to and follow. The Office of the Inspector General of the School of Education is very active already, as you know, as is GAO looking at education in California. And in terms of my office's role on construction, I will, upon receiving clarification, communicate immediately with the school allocation board.
That's great. Ms. Brownlee, did you have follow-up questions?
Well, I was just concerned, Mr. Chair, when you spoke about closed session for a fraud case. I just wanted to make sure that only a closed fraud case does not have to be discussed in closed session, only if it's an open case and we're in the middle of it. And in front of the Inspector General, I just wanted to make that clarification.
Thank you.
Ms. Brownlee, I rely on you for your leadership on those matters. That's good. Okay. Are there other questions from board members? Ms. Schick, thank you very much for coming. We appreciate it.
Thank you for
We're
having me.
going to have more discussions here about audit procedures, audit authority, audit related. Maybe we call you back in a few months if it makes sense. Maybe you can get that time, give us an update on any, as things become more clear about the Build America bonds. I'm hoping that there's no additional audit requirements above and beyond what state law already calls for. But if there is, you would be a great resource to turn to, and I know your time's slight, but if we can call you back in at some point, if it would be helpful, we'd like to do that.
I'd be happy to. I'm very much looking forward to any involvement or cooperation I can give this board as we all move to this higher level of accountability and transparency.
Great. Thank you so much. Now, while we're on the subject of audits, Ms. Rombach, were you successful in contacting the board member's office we discussed earlier?
I put in the call, but I have not communicated with the office.
Oh, there was nobody there at all in the office?
There was, but wasn't
Wasn't the right person to talk to.
wasn't the person wasn't available to speak at that moment.
Okay. Very good. Well, that's what it is. Let's see what's next.
The status of fund releases would be the next item on the agenda.
You know what? Why don't we hold those? We've got a quorum here, which we could lose at any minute. Why don't we come back to Ms. Silverman's reports? We've got some other reports. Our next section of the agenda are consent special items, and I understand, with the exception maybe of one of them, they're non-controversial. We might be able to get items 7 through 12 taken care of rather quickly. On item number 7, which is the Glendale item, I am going to ask for a roll call vote, and we're probably we may not actually have enough votes today to put that item out unless we get 2 more members to show up, in which case it may have to be held over to the next meeting because the chair is going to ask Mr. Harvey to vote with the chair, and I'm not going to support that one because that goes back to the Glendale item, which we both voted no on. But I think that our other board members were all supportive of that. So we could take a vote on that today, leave the roll open, but I'm not sure we're going to get enough members here to close that item out. Does the staff know whether, in addition to Senator Lowenthal, we're going to have any other members today show up? Do we know about Assemblywoman Fuller? Thank you. Sorry, it's a long day.
We only had 2 that RSVP'd no, and that's Senator Weiland and Rose Gerard.
Is Ms. Fuller's staff here? Do we know if she's going to make it? Okay, well, just so the Glendale folks know that if we open the roll on your item and you don't get enough votes, since we don't have any rules and procedures established with this body, you're not going to be harmed in any way, so I don't want you to panic, okay?
Can I just make a comment to that as well? This appears to me to be the second time that we've had an issue like this. And I would like to see maybe the Rules and Procedures Committee look at this because it appears to me we're taking a second vote on an item that we already voted on. And that this is the second time that this has happened. And so either the funding item should come forward with the item that is of appeal and it is all voted on at once, but this seems to me, in my mind, to have another vote on the funding component of an item that the board has already approved. And it appears that a project could, get one approval and not the other. And to me, that doesn't seem right. So
I'd like Mr. Cook to respond to Ms. Moore's question, but I want to say something for the record. I have done and will do everything in my power that I can, because my power is limited, to make sure that this item gets closed out. A majority of the board members voted in support of the Glendale item, and I will do everything in my power to get this item closed out. So let me just, if anybody has any questions or wondering, even though I'm not supporting it, that doesn't mean I'm going to do anything to keep this from happening. But I got to have all the board members here, and we've got one board member that's missed 3 meetings in a row, and we've got 2 other board members that aren't here right now, so we can only do what we can do with the votes that we have. Rob, can you respond to Ms. Moore?
There have been 3 instances where this has been the case, and in all of those, some of these cases, it's been very difficult to determine what the funding should be and what the funding item should be when the board takes up the actual appeal itself, because frankly, the board can take some twists and turns sometimes that staff does not anticipate, and we could well do quite a bit of work to prepare what we think the funding item ought to be if the board approves something, only to have nothing that the board can really act on at that time. So this has occurred. This is the 3rd time. It's certainly not a normal circumstance. But I
appreciate your comments on the chair of this, but I just had a concern there. If you feel that because of how the appeals get heard that it persists, I'd like to probably avoid, I think we would like to avoid it in the future because it does appear like a second vote. So given your comments, hopefully we won't have a problem later.
Okay, well, in the event, we're pretty sure that we're going to have at least one more board member, and we might have 2. So if it's okay with the board members, I think we should go ahead and open the roll on this item, and then that way if we get to the 2 members, we can close it out and dispense with it. So if we could have a motion to approve item number 7, which is the
I'll move approval.
We have a motion.
I'll second, but I just want one clarification, and
Yes.
that is to make sure by the board rules that if 2 more members don't show up, that we can remove the motion and hold it over.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Let's make that part of the motion. If we don't get 2 more board members to show up, the motion will be removed, and we'll hold it over to the next meeting.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Ms. General, please call the roll.
Senator Hancock.
Aye.
Assemblymember Brownlee.
Aye.
Assemblymember Torlakson.
Aye.
Scott Harvey.
No.
Kathleen Moore.
Aye.
Tom Sheehy.
No. Okay, so that is 4 aye votes, 2 no votes. We'll hold the roll open now. Unless any of the members want to have discussions on items 8 through 12, my understanding is that there's no controversy over the staff recommendations here, and perhaps we could approve those 6 items, or 5, 8, 9, 10, 11, 5 items as one block. Is there, all right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? No. No, none opposed. So items 8 through 12 have been approved. Okay, which takes us to item 13. The item 13 is, I think, similar to the Glendale issue in that we've already had one vote on the San Bernardino appeal, and then I guess they're still unhappy with some of the details here. My sense of this item is that there's still some confusion over this, and one of our board members who's from the Inland Empire, who's probably the closest to us, closest to this issue, is not here. We can take this item up now, but I'm not sure we're going to be able to resolve it, and we might be able to move forward and have a more successful discussion on some other items. So I'm asking my colleagues, if you want to take this item up now, I would be fine with putting it over. Until the next meeting. But we'll take it up now if you all, pleasure of the committee.
Is there a compromise which says we at least trail it to see what happens later in this meeting, and then, if necessary, put it over until the next month?
I would be happy to move that. I think that's a good idea. If Senator Lowenthal, I'm not sure if it's his or is it Assemblywoman Fuller's district?
It's neither. Neither. None of the legislators have this district. But Rose Gerard, who's not here today, is from the Inland Empire. She's closest to it. She's not from San Bernardino, but she's a neighbor.
So are you recommending to hold it over or just do it?
Oh, I would like to hear it and clear the calendar if we could.
I don't think we've got the votes to clear the calendar. We don't have a full board here. And I don't think we're going to get to a unanimous decision. There's only 6 of us here right now. We can do it if you'd like to.
I guess I thought Mr. Harvey was suggesting that we just move it to the end of the agenda.
And then
we see if we get more members.
That's fine. Is that agreeable to the board members? To just skip over it for right now?
Sure.
Okay. All right. Items 14 and 15. Rob, who's presenting those?
Lisa Silverman will be presenting those items.
They're interconnected, aren't they?
Absolutely.
Okay, so we can present both of them, and maybe we can vote on the package.
Yeah, correct. Good afternoon, please. Sorry, members of the State Allocation Board, if I can get your attention and turn over to tab 14, page 133. Today I'll be presenting the recommendations for prior bond fund transfers. Currently, we have authority right now to transfer any available prior lease purchase funds, and we have the authority to transfer those funds to an active SAP program. And today we have $5.5 million available for transfer to our program. Prior to the freeze, the board apportioned $2.4 billion in state apportionments, and in March and April, the Treasurer's Office was successful to sell nearly $2 billion of bond proceeds. However, the State Allocation Board, prior to that freeze, had allocated $2.4 billion in apportionments. And we haven't touched base on this issue, but there is a shortfall of funds available, and that's noted in tab 5 in the status of funds release report. There is $445 million that are short to provide funding to all the projects apportioned. And notably, last month, Rob reported that we had $1.2 billion of unfunded approvals that have been approved by this body. So the issue before today, we wanted to highlight, our recommendations are different from the options, from the item that wasn't presented last month. And we think that there's better outcomes with the recommendations we have today. So the issue before us is really bond authority versus cash. The issue here involves joint use program. We have $9.5 billion in joint use bond authority. However, we have projects presented in tab 15 that represents $10.3 million in unfunded approvals. But the issue raises here is we're oversubscribed in our bond authority by $755,000. In addition, we also wanted to reconcile a clerical error for a rescission of a project for Santee Elementary School District, and it was a joint use project that previously was on the funding list. By correcting this error and adding this project back to the list, we have a deficit in our authority, which the deficit, if you add the Santee project, in addition to being oversubscribed by $755,000, and that oversubscribe is by providing Lake Tahoe a fully funded project. So in order to reconcile that, if this board chooses to move the motion of staff's recommendation, this board will be able to provide a full unfunded approval at Lake Tahoe Unified School District, and also provide a full unfunded approval, a full approval for Santee Elementary School for the joint use project. And what we provided is a creative solution to address this bond authority versus cash issue. And the options that we're going to present today is present $1.1 million to the school facility joint use program as an as-needed basis. And an as-needed basis, we're going to secure it as a credit line. So the cash available would be secure as a credit line for that oversubscribed program. And in turn, we do have an understanding that we have some joint use projects that potentially could be rescinded, and once those projects do rescind, and that could potentially happen sometime in December, we will credit back that authority to the program. Ergo, we have the cash available, and we can actually provide full funding for those joint use projects. So if this board elects to reserve any funds for that purpose, again, it's critical for the districts to understand that these are estimates of funding that would not constitute a commitment or an obligation on behalf of the State Allocation Board and those potential applicants who would be solely responsible for any local decisions and investment. So our options today is to secure on an as-needed basis a credit line for that cash of $1.1 million to the joint use program, and transfer the balance of the 5.5, which is 4.4, to the next eligible project that submits a fund release. And we believe those are options that are being presentable, and we're hoping that the board will accept those options.
Okay.
I have a question. I'm wondering if there is the possibility for consideration by the board members of the transfer of the amount to make the joint use projects whole, as you suggest, which I'm very appreciative that you work that creatively to do so that we can fund the entire list. My concern is on facility hardships, and that those, by their very definition, are supposed to be a facility hardship, usually an emergency type situation. And that we have the funding for those. They seem to be a higher priority than the regular program funding. And I'd like to see that the remainder reserved for those types of projects. I understand there may be a cash flow issue with that. Could you talk about that?
Right. Well, the issue that we presented is obviously prior to the freeze, there was some health and safety projects that obviously had apportionments, but during that freeze, obviously we worked closely with Department of Finance, and we had allocation of funds, and so we were able to provide funding for health and safety projects that were shovel ready at that time. And the issue is with reserving monies for these health and safety projects, they're for reserves for projects that have received an unfunded approval, and that creates a problem by trapping the cash.
Because is this hard cash? So do we have 4.4 million to spend.
Correct, correct.
Can the board consider health and safety projects a priority for that funding?
Correct, but then the board would have to get in a discussion of whether or not they want to provide these health and safety projects that are on the unfunded list to an active apportioned status, and that's how we're able to achieve that. However, the problem is we're still $440 million short for those active apportioned projects prior to the freeze. So, in essence, you're creating a disadvantage for those folks who are still waiting in line to get funding approvals.
The $440 million is regular program projects.
Right.
Correct?
Right.
And so are there any on the $440 million that are facility hardship projects?
No.
We cleared the list of those projects.
Yes.
So if someone comes into us with a facility hardship project, in essence right now they go to the end of the line and they wait for their funding like all others.
They're receiving an unfunded approval. Right?
I mean an unfunded
right,
approval,
correct? Correct.
So I guess for future, I'd like to consider, is there any way that we can assist emergency situations during this funding freeze? And this seemed one way that we could, but perhaps we're not able to because of the cash flow issue.
Correct. And the other issue we should also be concerned with is that reservation of funds at $4.4 million, if it's sitting there until we're able to provide active apportionments, then what we also create is another problem, is the problem of being imposed federal arbitrage penalties for sitting on those prior bond funds. So that's another component that, you may set aside $4.4 million today, but every 6 months the IRS will review the Treasury's account and determine whether or not there's penalties should be posed because we're not relinquishing the cash. And so that fund the reserve may be dipping every 6 months. So
are you saying that option 2 is not really an option? I mean, it's presented here for facility hardship,
right.
But are we saying that it really isn't an option?
Well, it's an option, but for this board for discussion. However, the issue is our risk is sustaining the cash that we can't provide funding for projects right now. So that's the issue.
Short answer, it's a bad option because that, as Lisa laid, the IRS will diminish that account if it's sitting there for a period of time, and instead of being able to fund a project with a full $4.4 million, that money is going to dwindle over time.
I'm prepared to move option 1 with the stipulation that if we are, could you make us aware of any facility hardship projects that seem to be a grave emergency, just so that the board is aware if those projects occur, and we can maybe consider any options we might have at a future date to deal with those.
Okay, so we're going to have more discussion on this, but Kathleen Moore has moved the staff recommendation. Is there a second on that motion? All right, we have a second by, was that Mr. Torkelson? Mm-hmm. Okay, we have Scott Harvey and then Assemblywoman Brownlee.
Please. All right, I'll jump in. There's another public policy question, because normally, Ms. Moore, I would be right behind you, because to me, funding those kinds of things that are more health and safety oriented, or people are at risk, I would certainly say we should do that. And I think this board, I would like the opportunity to do that, but the second bullet caught my attention too on the cons, which is this line jumping issue. We tend to have a practice that says first in, first out. And I'm very willing to work with you on finding ways to move projects that this board deems more significant for whatever reason, whether it's public health and safety or otherwise. But I want us to recognize that we may be pushing against this time-honored issue of first in, first out.
Thank you. I just wanted a quick explanation about the amount of the administrative fees. In the item, it talks about the balance having declined from $6.6 million to $5.5 million due to administrative fees paid to the state controller, treasurer, Department of Ed, etc.
Lisa?
Those are routine charges that gets offsets to our account on a regular basis. So at times we can have these offsets for these charges. They're actually budget line items in our annual budget as far as administrative costs. So if you have funds in a particular account, then obviously those are charges that we incur, and so they are normal charges, interest cost, admin costs for controllers processing our funds release, other overhead charges. So those are standard costs. And again, the more we retain these funds, those funds could also be subject to additional costs. So, I mean, those funds could be dwindling as we speak.
And is there a formula for that in some sense? I mean, is there a way to predict what those costs are based on a particular bond amount? I mean, is there a rate, a formula, or is it just as the bill comes and there it is?
Right.
It's as the bill comes.
As the bill comes, yeah. And sometimes the bill comes quarterly, sometimes it comes monthly. So, I mean, it all depends.
And do you have some way of, in the spirit of transparency, knowing whether that's the appropriate amount?
Right, we validate the charges, compare that to our appropriations every year, so, yeah, we do reconcile that.
Right.
Okay, is that Ms. Bell?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, let's stop. Hold on one second. Senator Hancock or Senator Lowenthal, any questions at this time?
No, I would be willing to move the staff recommendation.
All right, we have a motion and a second on the staff recommendation. Mr. Harvey.
I wanted to follow up on some member Julie Brownlee's comments, because what you didn't say was the reasonableness of the assessment. Do we have the opportunity to ever look at how those overhead charges or administrative charges stack up against other entities which make those assessments? Do we have the opportunity to negotiate them? In this budget time, DGS has gone out and very aggressively gone to every contractor, whether it is for personal services or public works, and said, given the state's condition, will you give us a break? And in many cases, we're getting 5 and 15% reductions in our contract amounts. So I'm sympathetic to the fact that if they're simply adjusting their overhead every year, and we're not having the opportunity to probe or to question, maybe we should. Are the fees reasonable?
I'm not prepared to address whether the fees are reasonable at this point in time. And at the risk of being impolitic, if the controller's office took a 3-day furlough, we might be able to reduce their charges to us by 15%.
We're working on that, Rob. Okay, are there other questions from board members? And welcome, Senator Weiland.
Thank you. This item now?
Well, if everybody's had their questions answered, we have a motion, a second, the staff recommendation on item 14. Rob, is there a conforming action on item 15, or is there not a conforming action on item 15?
If staff recommendation is moved on item 14, then staff recommendation on item 15 is taken care of.
Yes.
And is full.
So if we take this vote right now and the motion passes, then we're done with 14 and 15?
Yeah.
Is that right?
Well, they're separate. But if the board were to move staff recommendation on item 14 and 15 together, then we're
motion was on item 14. We haven't.
Well, it's on 15 too.
Okay. So I think Ms. Moore was the maker of the motion. Would you be willing to amend your motion, move the staff recommendation on both? And Ms. Hancock second. So then we're moving the staff recommendation on both items, 14 and 15. All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none. Now, we left the roll open on the Glendale item. There were 4 aye votes. There were 2 no votes. And we have 2 members that have shown up. So, Ms. Genero, could you please lift could you please call, somebody help me, what tab number was that? 7. Could you please, tab number 7, call the absent members, please?
Yeah. Senator Lowenthal? Aye. Senator Hancock?
Aye. No.
I already voted, actually.
I think you mean Senator.
Oh, I'm sorry. Pardon me.
Come, Senator, vote early, vote often, Senator.
Senator Weiland?
Aye. Okay. We have 6 aye votes on that. Okay, so tab number 7, the Glendale item has been approved. Okay.
Chairman Sheehy?
Yes, Senator Hancock.
I believe that Senator Wyland has to leave in a minute. And I just wondered if we could take item 21, seismic mitigation, up out of order while he's here.
Okay, hold on.
And also San Bernardino, item 13.
Sure. Hold on one moment, though. We still have another item that's on call. When we approved the agenda calendar, when we approved the agenda, the consent calendar, God, man, this is my 5th board meeting today. I'm a little punchy. When we did the consent calendar, we left the Elk Grove Unified School District items open to accommodate Ms. Moore, and we had 4 aye votes. And so could you please call the roll on the absent members for this is for the consent calendar.
Yes.
Senator Lowenthal?
Aye.
Senator Wyland?
Aye.
Okay, that has 6 votes. Okay, so the consent calendar has been approved. Do we need to do anything on the minutes? The minutes are okay? Okay, now we have a request on item 13, is that right? Yes. And also on item 21. Now, my sense is both those are going to take some time. What's the pleasure of the committee? We skipped over 13. Maybe we should start with that. Goodness.
Maybe I should just do this without pressing the button.
Senator Wyland, would you like to move to this spot here and try this one?
Well, if you pick me up like this, does this work? Mm-hmm. What I'd appreciate the committee doing is allowing me to vote on these even if we hadn't had a discussion, because I've examined it, because I have to leave.
Well, if we're going to extend that courtesy to you, Senator, then I think we need to extend that courtesy to everyone, and some of us are going to be here for the whole meeting. So what's the pleasure of the board? Do we want to open up every item so everybody can cast votes right now?
Well, only people requested.
Only people that requested. Do we have any other requests besides Senator Wyland? And would that be on items 13 and 16, Senator? That's 13 and 21?
13 and 21.
There'll be on item 21, option 1A, which I believe we've discussed.
It's the staff recommendation.
Yeah, it's the staff recommendation with the additional language that the state architect's office will develop a process for looking at situations that may not fall into any of the building types, but where there is an engineering report that indicates that the building would be in imminent danger of collapse in an earthquake, and that they would then be able to go through the process with any applications like that we might get, and either reject them or decide that we could in fact fund them at their discretion. In the meantime, while they're developing this process that would take 3 to 6 months, we would move ahead and with the option 1A and hope very much that we would get additional applications coming in so we can spend the money, since we know the need is out there.
Okay, Senator Hancock, that's great. I think my sense is on the seismic issue, we're going to need to have a little fuller discussion, and we may find some language that refines the second part of your motion a little bit. That was a lot to take in. I don't have any problem with that. Senator Wyland, if you're going to have to leave and you want to support Senator Hancock under item.
Well, I'm familiar with the amendment that she plans on introducing.
Okay.
And I do support that.
I can't guarantee you that when we finish up that's where we're going to end up.
I understand, and I think as much as I may support that, I don't know that I can, well, actually, this is not like a legislature. I don't know that perhaps I couldn't, since I'm familiar with the intent. The question...
Just turn your mic off, I think, is probably the best.
The question becomes, can I, and I don't know that the committee actually has rules, our legislative committees do, can I make a vote?
If we often in legislative committees will open the roll if the bill has been, there's been a motion on it. We will open the roll to those who can't say it, if there's been a motion. And I would move 1A with the amendment suggested by Senator Hancock on 1A.
And Mr. Lowenthal, I'll second your motion on the proviso that we have some flexibility to work on Senator Hancock's language. I think that my sense is there's probably going to be enough support here today to approve that motion, but I'd like to have the ability to talk about a little bit, maybe tweak the language, and to give Senator Weiland a chance to vote. I think that's great.
Yeah.
So would you like to be? So will you support Ms. Hancock's motion even if we tweak the language a little bit?
I do, because I've examined it. I think the underlying intent, I support.
All right. So we do have a motion and a second to approve the staff recommendation with a slight modification offered by Senator Hancock on item number 21. And rather than calling the roll and going through all that right now, because I don't want to truncate the discussion, Mr. Weiland, how are you going to vote on that item?
I will vote aye.
Okay, very good. So we'll put that item on call.
I would like to do is proceed to the San Bernardino issue.
Well, that was next on the list. So I think that's where we would have been.
Also, so I'll make a motion to approve the San Bernardino appeal.
To approve the San Bernardino appeal. Hold on. So first of all, which tab are we going to?
We're doing tab 13. And the motion to refine it a little bit would be to grant the project of February 2009 unfunded approval date.
I'm sorry?
The motion would be to grant the project a February 2009 unfunded approval date.
Somebody write that down so we can come back to that. Because I'd like to have a full discussion of this item so I can understand what that means, the implications.
That's fine.
So we do have a motion by Senator Weiland to move that. We have a second by Mr. Lowenthal.
Well, and the motion has a second, which is to reduce the district's liability in two ways. Number one.
I'm sorry, this is still part of the motion?
This is part of the same motion.
Okay. Do you have something written out for us?
I do.
Did you want to pass it out?
I don't have it in a form in which I can pass
it. Okay, no problem. Go ahead.
I believe the district can put it in a form in which they can pass out.
I'm a little bit uncomfortable with the member making a motion and leaving, and then having a district passing out what they, who's the entity before us, passing out what they think it is you're willing to support. That to me strikes as being a little bit of a conflict of interest.
Well, what if then I make this motion? We can copy the motion that I am making here. And so, because all you're really doing is, what you're saying is, if the motion is not perfectly clear, it simply makes it clear. In other words, I could make the motion, someone could write it down.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
You want to repeat what you think the motion is, Ms. Jones? Ms. Jones thinks she's got your motion down, Senator.
First part of your motion, February 2009 unfunded approval date, and then the second part was reduce the district's liability, and you haven't gotten to your 2 points yet.
Correct.
And the 2 points part of the motion?
Yes.
Okay, please continue, Senator.
There would be 81 grants reduced from the district's new construction eligibility. And 324 grants reduced from the district's ORG eligibility.
This in essence is the approval of the district's request.
It's in essence approval of the district's request. I'm just...
Okay, you're covering the motion. Okay, so you got that, Lisa? I got it. Okay, well, we'll have a discussion on how that impacts all the other districts that are in line for the same funding. and then we'll see if you've got support for your motion. We got a motion in a second, so we'll have a vote on that motion.
That's what I like, is just a vote, and
You're gonna Ms. Senator Weiland, how do you vote on your motion?
I vote aye.
Okay, so we have you down as an aye, and we'll call the roll on the rest of the members.
Correct, and if subsequently that turns out differently, it does, but I would be recorded as an aye vote on this motion as it's made.
Yes, Senator, you are recorded as an aye vote. So
Okay.
we're good. So is there anything else? Well, we have Senator Weiland here. Was there any other item that, we've got 7 members here. Was there some other item that somebody wanted to take up? Scott? Harvey?
Actually, I have a request for the Senator. As a member of your Rules Procedures Committee, I think this discussion underscores the need for us to have rules and procedures. So I'm hoping that when your schedule allows, we can have a robust discussion so that we don't have this awkwardness.
I agree absolutely. I think all of us agree that we need that, and if in the course of that this procedure is not part of the rules, I accept that completely.
Well, it won't have any bearing on what we do today. What we do today is going to be...
What we're doing today is within the framework of what does happen.
We don't say we apply by the Brown Act or Robert's rules or... In the past...
Well, we generally use Robert's rules for parliamentary issues, but for example, you could have an item that comes up on appeal 5 times and never get enough votes to pass, and it's never dead. It just keeps coming back. There's not like a legislative committee where a bill gets granted reconsideration and then it has an up or down vote. So we don't have that. So Senator Weiland, thank you. And we'll look forward to the Rules and Procedures Subcommittee meeting real soon. Okay, so I think we're on item 13, and I think it would be helpful for the board to have a full discussion on item 13. Rob, could you please have the staff present item 13?
Rick Asbell will present this item.
Good evening. Good evening, Mr. Chair and board members. We are at tab 13, stamp page 129. The purpose of this report is to present the district's request for overcrowding relief grant for a project that previously received new construction site and design funds under the school facility program. This item touches upon 3 critical issues. One of them is duplication of funding date and status of the ORG project, and the district bridge financing requests. So at the February 2009 State Allocation Board, the board approved the district's appeal to request ORG funding for a project that received site and design funding as a new construction project, provided that there is no duplicate funding. This project is being funded from 2 different funding sources, ORG and new construction, with 2 very different types of eligibility. The one common funding line item shared by the new construction and ORG projects is the design apportionment. For the new construction project, the district received a design apportionment and funding equaling 81 pupil grants. Therefore, they must have their new construction eligibility reduced by that 81 pupils. This standard is applied to all districts. Without this reduction in eligibility, districts could receive an endless amount of state funding because their eligibility would never drop. It should be noted that the district continues to retain all the new construction design funding it has received. Because the district received and retained the design funding for the new construction project, receiving design funding again for the ORG project would be duplicative. Also, because the district was replacing 15 ORG portables with this project, the corresponding 405 ORG pupil grants, and that is calculated by taking 15 classrooms, multiplying them by the loading standard for 9 through 12 of 27 pupils each. That must be charged to the ORG baseline to account for the portables being replaced. As for the funding date and the status for the ORG project, the district has previously requested a December 2008 apportionment. However, a Department of Finance letter dated December 18, 2008 advised all departments to cease authorizing new grants or bond obligations for bond projects. The letter also discusses that any expenditure not in compliance with the budget letter could result in the department's or agency's operating budget being obligated to pay that expenditure. As a result of this language, the SAB does not have the authority to make apportionments without potentially impacting OPSC's operating budget. The district has provided an alternative proposal if the SAB is unable to provide a December 2008 or any other apportionment for this project. The district would request a February 2009 unfunded approval date for that project. The district's proposal is based on the SAB's approval of the district's appeal in February 2009. After the appeal was granted in February, the district resubmitted its ORD application. The OPSC processed the application under accelerated timelines compared with other projects received on that date and prepared the item for the July 2009 SAB. The OPSC is recommending a July 2009 unfunded approval date, as this was the earliest date at which the district's application was presented. Finally, the district has made a couple requests concerning bridge financing. First, authorization that bridge financing can be allowed on unfunded approvals and the bridge financing not be considered district contribution.
I'm sorry, stop. What does that mean, bridge financing? What does that mean? What are they asking for? I don't understand what that means.
Those are loans that the district would take out on its own accord.
Are they asking us for that?
They're not asking us for the loans themselves. They're asking for an exception to the board's policy on those loans.
Our policy is to not allow bridge financing?
No, that's not correct. Our policy is to allow bridge financing and that it be applied to the specific projects that have an unfunded approval or an apportionment.
Okay.
And that when the district receives funding for those specific projects, that they close out the financing, that they use the funds that we give them to repay and pay off the debt.
So what's different about what they're asking?
Well, I think it's just more of a clarification. It was really spelled out in the board item or the policy that the board approved, and there are steps. And if the district follows those steps, then we can accommodate their request.
Okay. I'm sorry, Mr. Aspel. I just wanted to understand that. Please continue.
Okay. Secondly, the second one's a little bit more complicated, but we'll give it a try here. Okay. Secondly, the district requests the ability to use state funds received on apportioned projects for other inactive or unfunded projects and not be required to retire the bridge financing with the received state funds until the state is in a position to release funds for all projects that have been apportioned or on the list of inactive funding.
Let me see if I've got this straight, because I didn't get the briefing on this because I wasn't available, and the OPSC staff wasn't available to brief me until about 15 minutes before this meeting. So it's just the way it is. They want to be able to do bridge financing, but then take that money and use it for a totally different project. Is that correct? That's what they want. They want bridge financing for a specific project, but then they want to use the money for something else.
They want to be able to roll it over to another project.
And then what was the second part of that? And then they pay the bridge financing off at some future date when we do what? Provide additional funds for some other project?
Let's see. With the state funds, until the state is in a position to release funds for all district projects.
What does that mean?
Apparently they have some other ones that are sitting out there, and they want those to be taken care of also.
I want to understand, maybe we need to hear from the district. I want to understand what they mean when they say, when the state releases funds for all of the projects. What is that? Rob, do you understand what they're asking for?
I can only assume, but I'd just soon hear from the district.
Sure, please, go right ahead. I'm sorry, I don't think your microphone's on.
Good evening, Will Attar.
Still not on.
Okay.
Can somebody, Rob, could somebody assist him?
It's on now?
It's on now, great.
Will Attar from San Bernardino State Unified School District. Thank you very much for hearing our appeal today. What OPSC staff are referencing is that we have multiple projects on the apportioned list and the unfunded list. And we cannot borrow the entire amount of dollars because of the condition that we have out there. So we borrow for the priority projects that we believe that they are priority. And then if we receive funding from the state for these projects, we can roll over that for the next priority project that the state already apportioned, but they are not able to release the fund for. So instead of...
I'm sorry, I don't understand.
Okay.
Can you try explaining that again?
Sure. The district has multiple projects in the apportionment list and also have multiple projects in the unfunded list.
When you say on the apportionment list, sir, you mean that full and final apportionments that this body had made in the past, is that right?
Prior to December 17th.
Which we were unable to fund because we didn't have the bond funds, that's what you mean by
Correct. Prior to December 17th.
Okay, and then in addition to that, you also have projects that were approved and put on an unfunded list, is that
Correct, after
okay.
December 17th.
All right.
Since we are not able to borrow enough to cover all the projects
on both lists,
we are able only to borrow for a specific number of projects initially.
Okay.
So if we are able to borrow that fund and we apply for fund
you're
release.
able to borrow which fund?
If we are able to borrow,
yeah,
and we apply for fund release for those projects that we borrow against. Now we are asking if we can use that that money to other projects in the list of the apportionment list and the unfunded list, rather than retire the bridge.
I don't know what the other board members, what your level of understanding is, but I don't understand why you're asking for authority from us to borrow money against one project, but then take the proceeds and fund a bunch of other different projects. What do those other projects have to do with the appeal that was before us? I'm not connecting the dots.
Sure. Chairman Sheehy, thank you. My name is Matt Petler with School Facility Consultants. Hopefully I can clarify a little bit. The OPSC and the board adopted a policy allowing districts to go out to the market and borrow money on the market. That policy has some procedures in place, and one of those procedures is that you can go out and borrow for a project, $10 million project, you borrow $10 million, but as soon as you get the money back from the state on that $10 million project, you have to immediately retire the debt. Okay. So what the district is asking is instead of having to do that, because they have multiple projects and can't access borrowing for all of those projects, could they, rather than retire the debt, when they receive that funding back, use that money towards their next project?
Okay. I have a question of staff. Is that a board policy or is that a regulation?
It's a board policy that was adopted in January and is a continuation of a policy.
That's a policy that could be changed by the board. Fine. Okay.
Right. And
so then the question is, it seems to me then the question is, if that's what we want to do in this case, board members, why wouldn't we want to make that same option available? I mean, why are we having this? I guess the question is, let me finish.
Yeah, sure.
In my mind, and I'm open to all of your input, if we're going to have this discussion, does it make sense just to have it in the context of San Bernardino in terms of the flexibility on this borrowing? Or if this is something that's good for San Bernardino, perhaps it would be good for other school districts. And are there policy or programmatic concerns that come out of it that we need to know about? Is this an issue that we should be talking about in a more global context? Because there could be other school districts, and rather than doing these as a one-off, one after another, if it makes sense to do this, maybe we could take care of the request, but do it so that if other school districts are in this situation, that they might be able to benefit too. That's my question. I'd love to hear either from the district or staff or both. On that point I'm raising. Oh, I'm sorry. Well, okay. Well, that's only the first time today, so I'm doing better. I'm sorry. We're going to hear from Ms. Brownlee first.
Well, I just want to say that I was briefed on this particular item, and I thought that there were two issues. One was the date stamp of the approval issue and the pupil grants eligibility issue. I wasn't briefed on, this loan issue and so forth. So I don't know when and where that sort of came up.
But that wasn't
It
part of
seems like
Mr. Wyland's motion,
this is
was
a
it?
third issue to me. I was only briefed on sort of two issues.
Okay. So, and it wasn't part of Mr. Wyland's motion, but so, but I'm sorry, was there other board member comment, Mr. Harvey?
Well, I don't want to be too redundant, but I agree. I question its nexus to the appeal. I think you made a strong point that it begs a broader discussion because it has to do with the policy separate from the appeal. And I would prefer that we set it aside and have a separate discussion at a future agenda on this question and take the two items that we all thought were the issue.
Is there any disagreement on the comments Mr. Harvey just made? Anybody? Okay. So Mr. Brownlee and Mr. Harvey, I'm sorry, I apologize. Ms.
Could we also, in the interest of that, expand that out, as you said, Tom, to include how this may impact and/or benefit all districts? So when this issue comes back before us, it's in the context of all school districts.
Rob, we have a lot of work to do with this committee over the next few months, but if this is an issue that's important enough to San Bernardino to bring forward, I have to believe it's important to other school districts. So somehow in the list of priorities, can we try to work this one into here sooner rather than later so that we can have a discussion about it, because I think that would be very helpful. And all due respect to San Bernardino, we're going to set that issue aside for a larger policy debate, which you'll have ample opportunity to comment and participate in. So your understanding, Ms. Brownlee, was on the date stamp and the... Okay. I know just enough about this, I guess, to be a little dangerous, so I'm not going to weigh in too much. I just want to make sure, or I'd like to hear staff comment on it. I just want to make sure whatever we're doing, we're not somehow creating a disadvantage for any other districts. If we were to approve, if the motion that Mr. Weiland made, that I just want to make sure that we're not cutting in line and we're not disadvantaging any other districts. Because the reality is that the bond funds are going to come in dribs and drabs. We hope they come in a big gusher, but right now we're not seeing that. And so we don't know how the fund releases are going to work going forward. And so I think it's going to become more and more of a sensitive subject with all the school districts that are queued up on the unfunded list. So I just want to make sure we understand that aspect of it, and if everybody's comfortable with it, then we can go ahead and move on. Rob, could you comment on that?
Well, to the issue about moving the unfunded approval date to February 25th, first issue is that was the approval date of the district's appeal. But as you've taken up tonight, the Glendale item, as you've taken up before the Lammersville item, those issues were not ready for an unfunded approval at the time that the appeal was done, nor was this appeal at that time. So
why is that? Why was this appeal not ready for an unfunded approval at that time back in February?
We had not reviewed, we did not have the application in our hands. We had not had an opportunity to review it, had not had an opportunity to calculate what the project would properly receive.
Had you not had the application in your hands at an earlier point in time?
Yes, but it had been returned to the district.
Had it been changed? Is it different? Did it change in any way?
Had not reviewed it in any way, shape, or form.
In respect of the item, Chairman, I think the board discussed and took action on that issue at the last meeting.
You did?
Yes. It was, wasn't it, Senator?
They approved their appeal.
Exactly. And part of that was, as I tried to prepare for this item as well as everyone, and I think we all have been struggling with that, and I went back to look at what was the motion of the board at the last board meeting. And what it states in the minutes is to grant their appeal and determine that if we had heard it earlier, however, in the time sequence we would have got it, that we deem their application valid as of July of that time. They were eligible for the hardship money. So I thought the action, and maybe our legal counsel can guide us on that, we've taken action on when we deem this application valid.
And you're saying that we deemed it valid in July?
That's what it says
July
in
of
the
09.
That's what it says in the transcript.
Lisa, can you comment on that, please?
Well, first of all, I didn't think it was the hardship. I thought it was an overcrowded relief grant. Is
Right,
that?
and they were in hardship at that time.
Hardship? Okay.
Well, no, that isn't it. Those were two separate statements, I believe.
Okay. I don't have a copy of the board's approval item. However, it seems to me that if they still had to get something in front, of staff in order for it to be approved, that it would not have been appropriate for the board to make a finding that their application was complete at that time when there wasn't an application that was even.
I think we determined that there was an application. That was the action of the board. As I recall, I think Senator Torlakson, it was your motion at the time.
I don't recall the details at the moment. I don't have a copy of the motion in front of me, but there was an issue of whether the application should have been sent back, whether it was actually an error to have sent it back, and therefore it should have been available for the hardship. The exact chronology I'm not remembering. I don't have my timeline or notes in front of me from the previous motion, but that was my recollection, that there was a disagreement as to whether the application should have been sent back.
And is the
And if
review...
it hadn't, it would have been there.
Is the review of the application a ministerial function, or is there some discretion that needs to be exercised in that review? I don't know.
Sorry, Teresa, could you repeat that? I didn't catch that.
I would be interested in knowing whether or not that application, submitting that application and the staff's review of that is merely ministerial, or whether or not there's some discretionary.
Can you explain the significance of whether it's ministerial versus whether there's discretion?
Well, yeah, first of all, you can't, if discretion would be involved, there would have to be an affirmative act to look at that application. And one could not have made a finding that an application was complete if, they could make that determination if it was just a mere ministerial action of submitting an application. But if there's more to staff's review of that application and there's some discretion that needs to be exercised, that would have had to have been done, I think, for the board to have made a successful, or to have actually made it retroactive to deem that that application was complete back in July.
With my comment, and I know that the other piece of our action at the last board meeting was to ensure that the project did not financially double dip in either of the programs. Right. That was a major concern, I think, of the board, and it appears that we've come to a conclusion on that we have separately accounted for each portion of the project. There isn't a double dip, except for this issue, I think, now that the school district is bringing forward. In their perspective, there's a double dip of the students. So, I think the staff has said that they don't agree with that. So now it's before the board what the action of the board should be around that. So I'm sorry.
I might have just handed this. I think, do all the board members have the document? We have that I was just handed. Who handed me this? This is the transcript from the meeting that we had where Senator Torlakson made the motion on the appeal. Lisa, did you just hand this to me?
No, I did not.
Susan Rombach. Susan, you just handed me this document. Did this come from our agenda? Okay, so Susan Rombach's going to pass this out, but this is a transcript from our hearing where Mr. Torlakson was the maker of the motion, and his motion said that the board finds that the district's ORG application submitted to OPSC in July of 2008 is valid. Okay, so the motion that Mr. Torlakson made said that the motion was valid, and that was supported by the board. So I think that issue by this body was decided, that they said that the application was valid in July of 2008. It said further, staff should utilize the calculation described in Regulation 1859.81.1 subsection E, so on and so forth, which is the deduction of the amount received for the product design and the preliminary apportionment. This was to prevent the double dipping, okay, right? So Mr. Torlakson made that, and wanted to make sure that there was no, and I think he was rather emphatic, no duplicate, no double dipping. So that was the motion. So I think this issue as to when the application was deemed valid, I think this body already decided it was July of 2008. Does anybody dispute that now that we have these minutes in front of us? So I think we can put that issue to rest. Some of us may agree or disagree with it, but it seems to be what the motion was of this body. I see San Bernardino nodding their head up and down. They like that. Okay, does anybody want to have any further discussion about that?
I would just, if I could add in response to our attorney's comment earlier, that I think the board weighed things and felt that we disagreed that the application was sent back after the staff reviewed it and sent it back, and therefore we went to the earlier date saying we felt that the application had been valid to begin with, and that's our decision looking at the facts at the time.
So then it comes forward from there, in my mind, and help me, staff, if it's correct, that if it was deemed valid in July of 2008, then the overcrowded relief grant would have come forward to this board like all the other overcrowded relief grants during that time period in December of 2008. But given the fact that we have the Department of Finance letter that indicates, no additional projects as of December 17th, then it was staff, it's the district's perspective that they would want to have their project approved at the very next possible, that we did unfunded approvals, which is February 25th of 2009, and the staff's perspective that indeed it's this meeting that this project is now being considered at. Is that correct, Rob?
Actually, there are a few things in there. One, the board actually hadn't decided the issue of making unfunded approvals until the February board, and we started doing them in March.
In March.
In March. I lost one of your points in there. But,
and that the staff's perspective is today. It's valid.
Actually, no. Staff's perspective is when it was first prepared and presented before the board as a full funding item, which was last month, July. It was ready. There's an aspect of the regs, but it's not a ministerial act. We don't just take the paper and, push a button and send it off to the board. There's a great deal of review. It's a $35.7 million project. There's a great deal of review and due diligence in the funding of that project, including analysis of site work. And I can guarantee you every single project goes through a detailed review on that. There's an awful lot of work that has to happen before a project can be presented to this board. When the appeal was approved, we had none of that in front of us.
One of the concerns that I want to share with fellow board members is if we, I want to follow, what's clearly what we, what motion that carried at the meeting with these notes. And so I think that may resolve this issue in terms of the timing. But one thing I just want to put on the record that I'm concerned if we do what the district wants on this item, we might be opening up other appeals with Lammersville and Glendale on how their item fits on the unfunded list. I don't know what the dollar implication of that is, but here's what I do know. To the extent that these projects move up, somebody on the back end is going to miss out, and I don't know who that's going to be. I don't know if it's going to be a district that you care more about or less about, or maybe you care about them all the same. But my only concern here, now that the board made its decision on the appeal, which is fine, I accept that, my only concern is that how we handle this issue of the funding and where it places, that we do it in a way that's fair to everybody and won't result in somebody who thought that they were next in line and ends up getting bumped. That's my only concern. Beyond that, I'm happy to support the motion that Mr. Weiland made. Yes, Mr. Harvey.
I don't want to lose sight of the fact that whatever we do here affects eligibility, and that is a huge question. And I'm still unclear as to the fact that we have cleared up the fact that there's no double dip. But if I heard the staff presentation correctly, part of their eligibility they're asking be retained is based on new construction. The fact that they got design money out of the new construction pot. And they're asking that money not be paid back, even though we're using the ORG application. Establish the ORG application as the date. Do we have to at least acknowledge that we can't count eligibility for new construction because that's a different pot? I don't want them to double dip on the eligibility count. I mean, it's fine not to double dip on the money, but I'm sensing that the other action they're trying to get at here is to recapture eligibility that they don't currently have. And by going back into time and selectively picking that date for ORG is one thing, but to now say not only do we want the ORG count, but we want the new construction count and the eligibility attached there too. I don't think that necessarily is fair. I'd like some comment on whether that is in play as well.
As this item is presented to you by staff, we have followed very faithfully what the board's direction was, to provide this district the full funding that it should be eligible for, but not more, that there will be no double dip. And as a key tenet to this program is a district's eligibility is a state liability. It's the district's ability to access a program. And as a district accesses funding from this program, no matter which program it is, there's a corresponding reduction in their eligibility. And to do as the district has presented, or is proposing, to retain new construction eligibility, that they receive $1.9 million in new construction funding, but they do not wish to relinquish any eligibility associated with that, allows them to double dip in new construction. To do as the district is proposing with overcrowding relief grant eligibility allows that district to go replace additional facilities, again, double dipping within ORG. We got the dollars right. We also have the eligibility right within this item. Absent those two things, this district does have a second bite at the apple.
Okay, so what's the will of the board? What will it do?
We have a motion before us.
Are we ready for a vote on the motion? Okay. Is there any objection to having the vote? Why don't we, Ms. Jones? Ms. Jones, can you refresh the board, especially for Ms. Fuller's benefit?
Sure.
What the motion was?
Senator Wyland's motion was that the district receive a February 2009 unfunded approval date and reduce the district's liability by 81 grants reduced from its new construction eligibility and 324 grants reduced from its ORG eligibility.
For a total project of how many grants? Is that the 405 then?
What is the grant business?
405 is correct.
What does the grant issue have to do with this?
Well, he did say reduce the district's liability. I believe he meant eligibility, but
That's fine with me, Senator. I agree with you. I think that was his intent too. But okay, sure, that's fine. But I still don't understand what the grant.
I do want to first of all thank you for granting the appeal at your February board meeting, clarifying that our grant was valid in July of 2008. Although we would have preferred to have a December 10th funding date in 2008, we understand that the bond certification has already been done and it would be difficult to do an amendment. But we do feel that the district would support a February 9th date for funding, even though it would be on the unfunded list, and would support that as a proper way to go. We feel that would be consistent with other appeals that have been heard, and typically those were granted on that date of appeal for approval. As far as the pupil grants, I would like to have Matt Petler get a little more involved with this because he technically knows the ins and outs of it.
Thank you, John. Good evening, Chairman Sheehy, members of the board. Matt Petler, again, with School Facility Consultants. Hopefully the handout that you received had two sides to it. One that had with the minutes from
I'm sorry, meeting. Which one? Two sides?
Yeah.
Well, mine was one-sided, Matt. Do you have more copies for the board? That's okay. $50 fine. They're going to take it out of your retainer.
Very brief. The district is in support of Senator Wyland's motion with Senator Lowenthal's substitution on eligibility versus liability. I think that is a correct clarification. We wanted to put together a quick chart showing the eligibility breakdown of the project. Senator Torlickson's motion in February was essentially to split fund this project between new construction and ORG, and in doing so ensured that there was no duplication, both in funding and the district believes duplication and loss of eligibility. And so in this chart, what we tried to lay out is that we've got a 15 classroom project for 405 pupil grants. The district is losing eligibility for 3 classrooms, 81 grants, and feels that it should lose then 324 grants or 12 classrooms worth of eligibility, so that in total the district's eligibility is adjusted 405 pupil grants.
And how does that compare with where you are right now?
Our understanding of the OPSC write-up is that the district should lose 81 pupil grants of new construction eligibility and then 405 pupil grants worth of ORG eligibility, and we believe that's a duplication of 81 grants in loss eligibility.
Off by 81.
Correct.
Okay. Do you concur with that, Rob?
The difficulty here is you've got 2 very different programs meant to do 2 very different things.
But before you get into all that, do you agree that we're off by 81?
Well, that's the district's proposal. I don't agree on that.
You don't agree?
I do not agree.
Okay. I'm not asking whether you agree with their position. I'm asking if you agree with the math.
Well, I agree with the math. That's okay.
Because I think that, you know, what's going on here, too, is that I understand what staff is saying, and these are 2 different programs. But at the end of the day, this was about buying a number of classrooms. And with this transfer taking place, with the funds not double dipping and then the eligibility not double dipping, at the end of the day, they needed 15 portables. They should be able to be in a place in terms of eligibility to buy 15 portables. And really, at this place, they're only eligible, based on the formula for the ORG, they're only available to buy 12 portables. And so I think I've got this right. Do I have it right? Generally. And so there has to be some accommodation so that they're still in a position to be able to buy 15 portables.
Okay. That's a lot more clear than I've heard anybody else explain it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, yes. So we have a request from Senator Lowenthal to vote. We do have a motion. Are you okay with that, Senator Torkelson? We have a motion and a second on the floor. Ms. Jones has described the motion again. We know that Mr. Weiland has already been recorded as an aye vote. Ms. Jenner, can you please call the roll?
Senator Hancock? Assemblymember Fuller?
No, I'm a little no.
Assemblymember Brownlee? Aye. Assemblymember Torkelson?
Aye.
Scott Harvey?
No.
Kathleen Moore?
Aye.
Tom Sheehy?
No.
Six.
Okay, so that motion has been approved. Are we done with this item? Okay, let's move on. I think, so we did, all right, we want to go to are we on item 21, is that right? Okay, Mr. Harvey says we're on item 21, and I always listen to what Mr. Harvey says. Seismic.
Thank you. Should I just do it, Tom?
Certainly. Yes, item 21, yes.
I hope, could you make sure he has it?
Thank you.
I have been working with various people interested in this and appreciate the board's accommodation as we put forward some of these ideas. I would like to move now that the adoption and immediate implementation of option 1A with additional authorization for the division of the state architect to develop criteria and ultimately to make recommendations to the State Allocation Board regarding seismic mitigation funding for any school building that has been declared as part of an engineering study to be an imminent danger threat of collapse during a seismic event. Projects funded under option 1A or through the process recommended by the Division of the State Architect and approved by the board shall not exceed the funds available in the Seismic Mitigation Fund. I would remind members that option 1A lowers the shaking threshold to 1.68 and adds several construction types to those that already qualify. So what the additional language would do is authorize the Office of the State Architect to review engineering reports for school buildings of any construction type if they have an engineering report that says they're in imminent danger of collapse during a seismic event, and to recommend to the State Allocation Board whether or not we should grant them eligibility, or the Division of the State Architect can also conduct independent engineering assessments.
So can we have, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I
Please
just
continue.
wanted to add, because I know there was a great deal of concern about how much money would be in the fund, and as I've shared with various members that I've talked with, right now, the low estimate for funding all projects that would be eligible under option 1A is about $147,049. The high cost estimate is about $167 million dollars. That would leave us about $30 million for any projects that might be deemed eligible through the review of the Division of State Architect.
Okay, so Senator Hancock, is it accurate to say that your motion with the first part of your motion seems crystal clear to immediately implement 1A? And then is it accurate to say that the second part of your motion has a constraint that it has to stay within the amount of funds available, and that it would not result in creating an unfunded list with additional state liability?
Right. That's right.
Okay. With that understanding, with Senator Hancock's motion, with that the recommendations coming from the state architect would not result in an unfunded list and funding projects beyond the $199 million. I know you already have a second, but I want you to know I support your motion. Are there other questions or comments from board members on this item? Mr. Harvey.
The guidance we have on this from the Education Code says that we must address the most vulnerable facilities. I don't know what your definitional change does to changing that most vulnerable. There's no question that we do have a finite amount. There's no question if you expand the shake zone, lower or add building types, that you're going to expand the number of eligible schools. That's a good thing. And I think I can truly and easily support 1A. What I'm having a little more angst over is a phraseology which is not part of the Education Code. It's not part of what the Seismic Safety Commission has ever looked at. And I don't know how we're stretching our liability to impact that $30 million. I just need a little more comfort on what it does to what has been a very deliberate process to make sure we're addressing the most vulnerable first. This doesn't have an element of that at all.
Staff, please correct me if I'm wrong. To your point, Mr. Harvey, if this motion passes, will the staff not have to come back to this body in the next meeting, or depending on our workload, meeting after that with the actual language that we would vote on as far as the regulation? Isn't that right?
The regulatory language for 1A is ready and presented before you.
But we have an addition to that. We have additional language that Senator Hancock has asked.
Yeah, but let me say that that's why the motion is worded to say immediate implementation of option 1A, the state architect is going to have to develop criteria for their review. They would bring that back to us. That would probably take 3 to 6 months. We want to begin right away with option 1A getting implemented, because the reason we're having this discussion at all really is that we have $199 million set aside and we're not getting any applicants.
Senator Hancock, I think I understand the intent of your motion. I'm going to make a suggestion and see if this makes sense. Since we don't have the other language in front of us, but we do have 1A, can we separate, I'm going to suggest we withdraw your motion and separate it into 2 motions, which I would support both motions, just so you know where I'm coming from. First motion being to approve staff recommendation item 1A, have a separate vote on that, and then come back and have a second motion, which would be to bring back language to approve the second part of your motion as a separate motion, because then the staff would have to come back to our next meeting with the actual language, and we would approve it then. In other words, see, I think if you combine it all together, we don't actually have that language before us, and I think we'd slow it down by a month. Teresa, can you comment on that, please?
Be better to bifurcate that for the board and make the motion to approve a specific option, and then if you would like staff or the state architect to do something else, have that as a separate motion.
Well, and we would not wait to act on your second part. We would do that tonight. It's just they'd have to draft the language and bring it back to us at the next meeting. That's my point.
They might not be ready because the language actually asks the state architect, division of the state architect, to do that.
Well, we could approve your motion. We could approve the second motion tonight, and then if the state architect was ready,
whenever
they would come back.
Yeah.
Would that be acceptable to you?
That would be acceptable to me.
Now, would you then therefore be willing to
bifurcate the
motion? And we already know that Senator Weiland supports this, so we're counting him as an aye vote on both. All we're doing is taking your motion and separating it into 2.
I'm wondering that we had a motion before us that Senator Weiland voted on. Can we bifurcate this at this time and consider a vote of a member that is no longer present?
We may lose his vote, but we probably still have 6. So.
I would be much more comfortable leaving this.
Okay. Fine. So you were the maker of the motion. Who was the maker of the motion?
No.
Her new one. She's read one.
Are you making a substitute motion? Senator Hancock, could you make a substitute motion?
She did.
Yeah. What
a substitute motion to approve 1A.
Immediately.
And then we'll come back to the second part.
Fine.
Is that okay? I'm not trying to rush you. I don't want to rush you.
I understand, and I think that would be an orderly way to proceed.
All right, fine.
I would make a substitute motion that for the adoption and immediate implementation of option 1A.
I'll second that motion. Do we need a roll call vote, members? Okay, we need a roll call vote. Ms. Genera, please call the roll on the substitute motion now.
Someone wants to speak to the motion.
I'm sorry, Finance, did you want to speak?
Yes, if I may. Chris Ferguson, Department of Finance. The Department of Finance would like to be on the record as supporting option 2. Option 2 stays within the $199.5 million. It provides flexibility to adjust the ground shaking intensity factor every 6 months incrementally or more expeditiously if all districts considered to be part of that have been contacted and either applied or stated that they will not be applying for funding under the seismic program. It ensures that the most vulnerable facilities would be funded preliminarily first, and then it would also not backdate to previous facilities before the May 2006 date. So the Department of Finance is on the record as supporting option 2, and option 2 is also the incremental option that Assemblymember Brownlee had alluded to in a previous board session. This is the incremental option.
Okay. So we have that duly noted. Department of Finance supports option number 2. Excellent. That's good to know. I'm sorry, Miss, did you want to come forward?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, board members. I just wanted to address the board briefly. I did provide a statement of the same today as well. My name is Carrie Matsumoto, and I am the Executive Director of Facilities for the Long Beach Unified School District. And I appreciate this opportunity tonight to address you today on behalf of our district. It is our desire to participate in this state seismic mitigation program, but we're unable to do so at this time. Currently, our district has 31 buildings listed on the AB 300 list and have submitted applications to the DSA for eligibility in the Prop 1D program. But based upon the current regulations, all buildings have been deemed ineligible to participate. It's unfortunate that we can't participate in this program given that our district has had firsthand experience dealing with devastation to school buildings after a significant seismic event, as you will see in the pictures provided to you today. On March 10, 1933, a 6.4 magnitude earthquake struck along the Newport-Inglewood Fault known as the Long Beach earthquake, causing 120 deaths, including 1 student fatality in our district, and devastated 70 schools in and around the Long Beach area, with most significant damage occurring to school buildings. Because the earthquake struck in the early morning hour before school started, we were fortunate to have escaped without more significant
May I
injuries.
just ask you a quick question? The board would like to know if you're supporting the motion that's before us.
What I'm asking actually is for consideration of expanding the criteria for the program,
That's what this does.
including expanding all categories and including that all building category types, and also the fault.
But the motion
zone.
that's before us right now is consistent with option 1A that's in the agenda, which expands the building types and also adjusts the ground shaking index to make it a lower threshold to meet.
But I believe if you look at our letter of July 20th, we asked for consideration of proximity to a fault line, and what was presented in the staff report was trying to translate or equivocate a fault proximity, proximity to a fault line, and equivocate that to a GSI factor, which is technically not correct.
Okay, so you don't support the motion then?
If I could understand and have it clarified, perhaps are you considering adding criteria that talks about proximity to a fault line as well as expanding?
No, that's not the motion.
So it's just the GSI factor. So
That's
I'm not
the first part of the motion, then we're going to come back with the second part.
Okay, so I'm not in favor of that particular motion.
Okay, if I could just comment, I would urge you to be in favor of the motion because some of the things that we're expanding may actually help you with your eligibility. I don't know if it will or not. Or the second part of the motion might. We've been working very hard on this, and unfortunately, some of the expansions couldn't be included. So I'm just acknowledging what you're saying.
Okay, we've got you on the record as not supporting this because you would like the proximity to faults as reflected in your July letter to be considered, and that's
Correct.
not.
And I did provide a copy of this statement, so if I am not able to continue reading it, can the record just please illustrate that? I did provide you a copy of that.
Are you okay with that? If you wanted to read it in, you can, but it'd be faster for us just to take your written testimony. Is that okay?
If you take in as duly noted the statement that I provided and acknowledge that,
We
then
will do
be
that.
fine.
We'll put it in our minutes.
Thank
Okay?
you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Matsumoto. Mr. Duffy.
Mr. Chairman, members, Tom Duffy for CASH. We're in support of this motion. CASH has been working since 2007 to try to create a viable program. This has been a very difficult one, and I know the constraints of the dollars are very important to finance and the administration and also the members of the Senate and the Assembly. We think that Senator Hancock's motion in support of what OPSC is suggesting with the suggestion of the additional review is a very reasonable thing to do. The only thing that we would ask beyond that is that as we monitor into the future how many districts come in, that we would have a re-review at some point in time, even if it's a simple staff review, to give you a report. So thank you very much.
I think that's an excellent idea, and we don't need a motion for that. Rob, we're going to approve something tonight. Let's make sure that going forward that we have quarterly updates on how this program's going. Okay? Can you?
Hopefully we'll be bringing forward projects to fund right after we do this.
Okay, thank you.
Is there anything else?
Just to thank Senator Hancock for this. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman and members, I'm Brian
Rivas on behalf of the California School Board Association. Just quickly want to thank Senator Hancock for bringing this before you. We're in support of the motion, and thank you for taking this up today. We really need the dollars to flow out to the schools, so we're in support of the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Rivas. Is there anybody else? Okay, we had a motion and a second on the floor. Yes, Ms. Brownlee.
Senator Hancock, so the architect, the Department of...
State Architect.
State Architect, thank you. Oh, that's the second motion. Okay, never mind, I'll ask.
Okay, so the substitute motion was to approve the staff recommendation 1A. Ms. Genera, call the roll.
Senator Lowenthal. Aye. Senator Hancock. Aye. Assemblymember Fuller. Aye. Assemblymember Brownlee. Aye. Assemblymember Torlakson.
Aye.
Scott Harvey.
Aye.
Kathleen Moore. Aye. Tom Sheehy.
Aye. Did you have another substitute motion?
I do have an additional motion to make, and that is to authorize the Division of the State Architect to develop criteria and make recommendations to the State Allocation Board regarding seismic mitigation funding for any school building that has been declared as part of an engineering study in imminent threat of collapse during a seismic event. Projects funded under upon recommendation of the Division of the State Architect and approval by the State Allocation Board shall not exceed the funds available in the Seismic Mitigation Fund.
And shall not result in an unfunded list. May we add that on?
And shall not result in an unfunded list.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second? Second. We have a motion and a second, so we're ready for a vote, but I think we have some more questions and comments. Ms. Brownlee.
So I just wanted to ask, so when the state architect does this work in your motion, then will he define what imminent threat is, or is that an already defined term?
We actually think there are going to be few of these. It's not defined, and that's why we're asking them to develop criteria so that they will actually have a kind of checklist of what would be considered under imminent threat. So, and probably no district will go out and do this, but if there are some districts that have been brought to our attention in which they have existing studies, and they will not be eligible under option 1A, but if the state architect has developed criteria accepted by this board, reviews those engineering studies, and believes there is an imminent threat of collapse, and it's an existing study, remember, they would have the ability to recommend to us that we have them be eligible for funding. And since the official estimates indicate that about $30 million will be left after we fund most of the schools that we know are eligible under option 1A, that would seem a sensible way to continue to work.
I'm sorry, Ms. Brownlee, did that answer your question? Mr. Harvey.
Two quick questions. And again, I'm just pulling one out here. Is there any merit in discussing whether or not those that are now going to be somehow defined as imminently under threat, that they exhaust other state facility funding programs before they come in under this one? The whole point being we've got a very small amount of money. We're trying to make sure those that are most at risk have the first shot at it. Is there any merit in saying, yeah, you can come under this new definition, but if you've got eligibility under modernization or new construction, think in terms of using those dollars before you come to seismic, because it is a much more specialized, it is much more limited. There are now only $30 million left or less. So is there any reason to consider having some requirement that we be told whether as a minimum that they got other eligibility or that they at least seek it before they come and get the seismic? And then number two, and finally, I don't know if there's a representative from the state architect here tonight, but if there is, there is. I would love to have 2 seconds of comment on how you see this second part of the motion unfolding, and if you've got any comments about how it would play out.
Okay, are you asking Scott, are you asking Senator Hancock to respond to the first part, or are you just making a statement that this body should consider that going forward, funding sources?
I'd like to hear her reaction to it, and then I'd like to hear if anybody else thinks there's any merit in it.
You know, I guess it's something that I would need to think about a little more, having just sat through the San Bernardino incident where they were trying, it was an appeal, not an incident, sorry, but where they were trying to clarify their continued eligibility under their regular apportionment versus the hardship. And I'm not sure how that plays out. I think if the state architect wanted to take that into consideration, that would be fine, but you know.
Okay, well, that's an issue that we can discuss in any meeting, Scott, so it's
Yeah.
not like it's, you know, another bite of the apple. Just, well, before we get to you, the second part of this question was the state architect. Could you come forward, please?
I have to make a phone call, I'm sorry, I had
That's okay.
meeting.
No worries.
I am Dennis DeLay, Division of State Architect, Principal Structural Engineer. This motion would mean that we would have to do a substantial amount of work to define this, what's an imminent threat. And working with the various stakeholders, I anticipate it will take a lot more than 1 month to come up with that
How long do you think it would take? 6 months? 3 months?
Well, it matters, you know, what sort of direction I get from the board and from the Office of Public School Construction about how tight you want to make these rules. If we're going to try to make this thing tight so that only $30 million is even possible to be spent, that will take probably more effort. But if our authority, let's say, is a lot looser, it probably take less time.
Our motion was to stay within the $199 million, so I think that's your answer on that one.
Yeah. Oh, okay, $199 million. Well, that makes it a little easier to come up with the criteria, but it's still, it took, how long to come up with the criteria last time? A year and a half?
15 months.
And that criteria was designed to be very, like a light switch. You know, it's easy for school districts to tell that their project was going to meet the criteria or not. And so this will be a little bit more difficult unless we make some sort of criteria that's very precise. And making that more precise criteria will take more time working with the implementation committee.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
I mean, it gives us a sense that it's not going to be immediate, but we'll look forward to working with you and trying to get your recommendations before us as quickly as possible, understanding that you have your own workload constraints. Do we have more questions of the state architect? Senator Torkelson.
Just to understand, my reading of the motion may be slightly different, which in terms of direction to the state architect, to define the imminent threat is one thing, and then the $30 million is another thing. I think coming up with a rational decision of imminent threat and then seeing who queues up to get it, and if you don't, you may have $40 million of applications, but the first 30 get in the door and get theirs, and that's it. But should we try to twist the definition of imminent threat to the amount of money available, or give some direction to have them logically approach it with the stakeholders and figure out what that means?
Not the constraint of how much money is available, and we're what? Oh, we're changing. Sorry, we're changing the criteria to make it easier for schools to qualify. So, what we want to avoid, Senator, is if we adopt a policy that's going to result in $170 million in funds going out, we don't want to then adopt an additional policy that would create $100 million worth of work, because then we don't have the funds available.
Sure.
I think we are constrained by the funds.
But the definition of imminent threat, I mean, I think he wants some direction of how tight to make it, and you got the general ballpark, you got a $30 million pot, right?
That's pretty much where we're at.
Right.
That's $30 million beyond that.
But not knowing
maybe zero. If we have $199 million worth of projects that walk in the door, just for the change on 1A, that's it. That's all we got. So, and they're going to have to work on. It's going to take time, and we can agendize the state architect, have them come back in the meetings.
In our discussions, we said 3 to 6 months, right?
I don't recall our numbers. And it's not entirely dependent on our activity, because we'll have to have stakeholder input, and then it comes back to here, and there'll be.
Why don't we do this? Why don't we have, if it's okay with you, why don't we have a vote on the motion, and then we can have the state architect come back in the next meeting. We can have more discussion. And Mr. Lowenthal's going to have to leave. We need to have this vote. Is that okay to vote on the motion that we have before us and have them come back, Senator? Okay, very good. So, all right. So we have a motion and a second. Was there anything else we could do to get your vote on this, Ms. Fuller? Okay.
Other than, never mind, just vote on it, it doesn't matter, and I'll register next time all my words.
Okay, very good. Ms. Jenner, please call the roll.
Senator Lowenthal? Senator Hancock? Assemblymember Fuller?
No.
Assemblymember Brownlee? Assemblymember Turlickson?
Aye.
Scott Harvey? Kathleen Moore?
Aye.
Tom Sheehy?
Aye. What's the vote count?
5.
We're going to hold the roll open. We're going to hold the roll open for Ms. Brownlee. And I know for the record, Mr. Harvey has not cast a vote, so.
Mr. Harvey, no.
Harvey's no. Ms. Fuller's no. We're going to hold the roll open for Ms. Brownlee. Sure, yeah. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Okay, well, yes, Mr. Cook?
I'm reminded by staff that we haven't taken a formal action on the regulation language on option 1A.
How did we not do that? We approved the staff recommendation. You said the language was ready. How did we not take, I'm sorry, that's very irritating. How did we not take action on that? That was the whole discussion. That's why we separated the question. We had a separate vote on 1A. That should be a conforming action.
It is a conforming.
The language is prepared. Language was before us.
Okay. It's a conforming action. It's a conforming
action. If the language hadn't been drafted, that would have been a different matter. But the language was drafted. It was available for everybody to see. Okay, so we're going to. Oh shoot! You know what? We're going to go into closed session right now, folks. We have a personnel matter that we have to take care of today, or we're going to lose one of our staff. And so we've got 6 people here, and I need 6 votes to take care of it. Ms. Moore, can it wait?
Well, I'm just saying, I know that there's a district that has traveled for one of their items here. If they're willing to travel again next month, Temecula, we have not taken action on your item, correct?
Which item was that?
Are you going to be financial hardship if we make you travel again next month?
Which item was that, Ms. Moore?
It is
Well, we have to go into closed session before we lose our quorum. It's critical. It's a personnel issue.
Items 18 and 19.
Well, if we still have a quorum when we come out, we can take it up. I just don't know what's going to happen.
Okay.
Okay. So we have an item on call that we're going to lift the call on when we come back into public session, and we need to clear the room and have our closed session. That's very important. We have to act on Susan. She's going to be out of her job.
Do we go to?
Mary's here.
I just
For items, items 18 and 19, we still have a quorum. I want you all to know that we are back in open session. And while we still have a quorum, we're going to take up items number 18 and 19. Do I hear a motion? We have approval of the staff recommendation on item number 18. All in favor? We have a second by Mr. Harvey. All in favor? Aye. Do we have a motion on item number 19? Do we have a motion to approve the staff recommendation on item number 19? A motion by Mr. Harvey, a second by Ms. Brownlee? No, I didn't second it. You didn't? I'm sorry. I thought your hand went up. Mr. Torlakson did. All in favor? Aye. You raised your hand. Aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, the ayes have it. So the staff recommendation on 18 and 19 is approved. Do we have any other actionable items that come before the board tonight?
For those items that we don't hear, can we bring them back?
Any items that needed action tonight that we didn't act on, we will bring it back in the next meeting. And the chair will stay here along with any other board members that would like to hear the informational items. But I think we're going to lose our quorum. Is that okay, Senator? Counselor, what do I have to do in the closed session? I just report that we engaged in personnel actions. We met in closed session. I have to continue it? And also, I'd like to continue this closed session to the next meeting. Can I do that? So we met in closed session to discuss personnel matters, and we're going to continue that to the next meeting. Mr. Cook. Which one was that? Is that the grant adjustment? What is it?
Item 17.
Is there any opposition to the staff recommendation on item number 7? Is anybody here in opposition to the staff recommendation on item 17? Mr. Walrath.
Dave Walrath, representing Small School Districts Association. We do not oppose recommendation number 1. We suggest, however, that recommendation number 2 be deferred until February. The reason for that is we're not sure how much money will be available for different parts of the program, and there's no assurance that there will be a 2010 school bond, although I'm perfectly confident there will be.
I heard your firm was going to donate a bunch of money for the campaign on that.
We'll do everything possible. The point is, to the extent that you're making commitments today on money that may not be able to be claimed after the 5th round, just for the purposes of fiscal flexibility, we suggest that this second part be deferred until February.
So there's no opposition. Mr. Walrath, is it fair to say that there's no opposition? Oh, don't walk away. We love you, Dave. We don't want you to go. So there's no opposition to recommendation number 1. Is that right, Mr. Walrath? But you're recommending on recommendation number 2 that we take that up at a later time. Okay. Okay, we have a motion on number 1, and we have a second. All in favor? Aye. Okay, now on item number 2, Rob, can you re-agendize that and bring that one back?
Certainly, we can bring it back. We'll find an appropriate time to bring it back.
We'll bring it back. Okay, good. Is there any other actionable items that we need to cover, Mr. Cook? Oh, we decided on the grant adjustment. We're doing 1% on that. And was there anything else? Oh, yeah, you guys said you missed that one. Was there anything else? That was Ms. Brownlee's motion, by the way. She moved 1%. Is there any other action? Okay, for the record, anybody here that really took me seriously, I was just kidding. We didn't discuss the grant adjustment. Was there any other actionable items that come before the board? We're still going to hear our reports, but we may lose our quorum. Is there anything else, Rob?
Item number 16, but I'm not certain that we actually have the agreement that we thought we had when we walked in the room. So let's put that over to next month.
Okay.
Could I also request, unless there's audience that do not approve of that we could hear the status of the emergency repair program funding at our next meeting, because I would like to take some time with this, and I think at the end of the meeting and our condition, or not condition, but just at the end of the meeting, could we have this scheduled for the next meeting unless there's someone that, or a board member that would like to discuss it now?
Okay.
Go ahead, Scott. My only comment is we heard about how furloughs are impacting staff and the agenda. Is this going to make the agenda more difficult for next month or more simple because we're just carrying this over? I want to make sure we are still abiding by this furlough impact every time we move things around. Are you okay with that request?
Well, we have the report ready to go, so we will be able to put it up next month. It's just, we've had a pretty aggressive agenda this month. We've moved a lot of items, which is great, but we have a few things that are hanging out there. That means, you know.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Rob.
Oh, it just means that there are fewer new items we'll be able to take up next month.
Well, okay.
Well, pleasure of the board. I mean, if we'd rather discuss it now, that's fine as well.
Well, I'm going to stay, and hopefully at least one or two other board members will stay to get through some of the other reports that we had, or so we can clear them off the calendar. And if you want to have a discussion, then we can, as long as it doesn't require action. We've lost our quorum. But I want to just say that I thought we had an agreement on the L.A. Issue with the critically overcrowding school funds, and I was prepared to support a motion that had been recommended by L.A., but so I just want you to know that, because I see Mr. Smoot's here, I see Mr. Baki's here, and that was what we had discussed when we had our briefing, and I think that OPSC was okay with that too. So I just want you to know, I don't know why staff is now reporting that there's some differences, but I think that we're going to be able to close that one out next meeting. Mr. Smoot?
I believe we can come to agreement on where we should be by next meeting.
Okay.
I don't think that's a problem.
And I want to thank the staff of LAUSD for, working hard on this and providing a lot of information to us. It was very helpful. I see Mr. Baki nodding his head. He was very helpful too, so I really appreciate that. So we skipped over a couple of reports. Ms. Silverman, can you take us back to the beginning of the agenda and take us through those financial reports very quickly?
Yes, real quick, tab 5, status of fund release report. We wanted to update the board in a March sale, which we received $548 million in bond proceeds. That we actually had some movement last month in this funding category, so we actually moved $4 million from the last report, so that's good news. $4 million, right.
Out of how much?
Out of, we had $4.3 million in reserve last month, so we moved $4 million, and we have $0.3 left.
So there's only $300,000 in actual cash left.
Correct, in that particular bond sale.
All right.
And then in April.
So let me just say, then, for all intents and purposes, we got all the money from March out the door.
Correct.
Except for just some crumbs.
There's 4 projects, right.
Okay.
And then so in the April sale, what we wanted to highlight is we received $1.4 billion in bond proceeds. We've nearly expended $1.1 billion to date, so we have $338 million in bond proceeds available. And most notably, I know the activity of funds being moved around, or last month we reported we moved $300 million. Well, this month we only moved $38.2 million out of Proposition 1D. So the money activity is kind of slowing down at this point in time. So that's what we want to share with you tonight. So the bond proceeds left available for April, we have $247.1 million available in proceeds. However, you compare that to the active apportion projects that haven't received a fund release, that's $692.6 million. So we still have a shortage of funds to provide for those particular districts of $445 million.
So the net difference between what we have available and what we had approved is how much?
445.
That seems like that's a smaller gap than it used to be. What happened? I thought the gap was more than that. That's all the gap is 445?
Right, right.
Well, look, nobody can take this to the bank, but I have to believe that between now and June 30th of 2010, the state treasurer will be able to sell at least $445 million in school bonds that we can use. So,
correct.
17
correct.
list.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else on item number 5, Ms. Silverman? Mr. Walrath, did you want to comment on this?
It's actually a combination of 5 and 6, so I'll wait till after 6 is done.
Okay, great. Thanks. Lisa, please continue.
Okay, for status of funds, tab 6, we wanted to highlight we're presenting $7.1 million in unfunded approvals for new construction out of Proposition 1D, $50.7 million that represents 36 projects for modernization out of Proposition 1D. High performance, we're bringing $0.3 million, again, in high performance for unfunded approvals, and charter school, $31.1 million of unfunded approvals. And total for Proposition 1D, we're providing $89.2 million in unfunded approvals. And so the other noted item in Proposition 1D was an interest expense charge. Moving over to the middle chart, Proposition 1D, we have an interest charge being allocated to that particular bond fund and money coming back to the program of $2.8 million. In Proposition 47, the lower chart, we wanted to highlight this board is providing $127.1 million in unfunded approvals, and we're bringing some money back in closeout. And we flip it to the following page, page 113, Proposition 1A, we wanted to highlight there's $0.1 million coming back to the program for rescissions. So in total, school facility program, we are providing $216.3 million in unfunded approvals this month. And moving forward to emergency repair program, we wanted to highlight that we are providing $12.1 million for emergency repair program funding. That represents 33 projects. So with that, I'll open it up for any questions.
Okay, so do we have questions from board members? I know we have public comment. Mr. Walrath.
Thank you, Chair Sheehy and members of the board, both of you. What I want to bring up is an issue that is going to be coming up. The Chair was articulate and even eloquent on the comments regarding the state's cash flow.
Who was that person, Mr. Walrath?
It was the Chair, Mr. Sheehy. It's amazing.
That's unbelievable.
And then he followed up later with a very technical bond financing term called, I think, bits and drabs or something close to that.
Yeah, bits and drabs.
The issue that we're asking the board to look at and direct staff and all of us to work on is how do we start addressing the unfunded list, the workload list, and the other issues related to fund release and apportionments if we do not have an anticipation that the treasurer will sell so many bonds all at once that not only do we clear all those lists, that we have more than enough money to make fund releases and apportionments on projects that have yet to be applied into OPSC. And what we're asking for is the beginning of some form of formalized SAB structure with staff and working with the PMIB on developing a policy on how to deal with when funds become available but not fully exhausting the list of unfunded or workload or apportionable.
Mr. Rowa, isn't our policy first in, first out?
The policy is first in and first out. And also,
doesn't that, and I apologize, I apologize, but doesn't that mostly address the issues you just raised?
No, it doesn't mostly address the issues. Let me give a series of examples. Okay. Let's say we're fortunate enough to have the treasurer agree to sell bonds after doing RANs, sell bonds in October and November.
All right.
And that bond sale is pegged at $6 billion. And of that $6 billion, $500 million is for schools. Right. So far, so good. That it means we cover the $400 million that hasn't been covered from the December, and we have $100 million, and you can factor what that means. What is not there is some form of telling the treasurer, and formally as an allocation board, one state agency to another state agency, PMIB, on what we believe are necessary as a scheduling of sale of bonds for school purposes over the period in order to address the funding flow necessary for schools. And it's that piece of it. And so when...
Okay, so you're talking about us formally communicating with the treasurer about scheduling for selling the bonds.
Correct.
Okay. Well, we could do that. I just as a practical matter right now, Dave, I'm not sure how much difference that'll make in terms of what the treasurer is or isn't able to do. But that doesn't mean that there's no value in making a recommendation or a request.
Correct.
Certainly do that. But, you know, our ability to access the markets have been driven by external factors and internal factors. Internally, within the state, we've had a very difficult time getting our financial house in order. And then externally, you know, we've had, with the capital markets, you know, going haywire at times over the last 12 months, we've had no control over that. So, you know, those are, both those things are completely out of the control of this body and to a large extent out of the control of the state treasurer, and they determine when he can go to market and sell bonds.
Absolutely. But to the extent that we're beginning to hit bottom, we hope, and that there will be a recovery, the nature of the ability to go back into the markets, particularly if the markets have become more stabilized over the past 12 months, means that in the next 12 months we may be in a world different than where we have been in the last 18. And if that is the case, then that type of structure, advocacy, and working with the PMIB, to the extent that the treasurer goes back to where he had been, where the state had been 3 years ago, where you start talking about the scheduling, and we can start talking about what amount goes out for schools.
Okay.
That becomes valuable along the way.
That's a good recommendation. Ms. Moore?
Support that in the manner that we can provide districts with an idea of when they may anticipate a potential sale of a bond over time, the greater they're able to plan. Right now, they're all sitting there, they have no, as we all do, no knowledge of when and if the next bond sale will occur. So I would support that to the extent that they can give us, can work with us on that information, and over time, if we can work with them to schedule out, what might be reasonable cut for schools as we go forward within the context of the whole fiscal crisis.
And I would like to refine that even a little bit more, Dave. I think that there's value in sharing that with the treasurer through the PMIB, which he chairs. But I also know that the treasurer is going to place a lot of weight on what the Department of Finance says with respect to public works bonds, both GO and lease revenue. Of course, we're not dealing with lease revenue in this body. So I'd like to maybe hear from finance would not to put you on the spot, Chris, and so if you don't feel you can speak to this, don't feel that you have to, but I think it might be also helpful for this body can also make a recommendation or request to finance with respect to the school bonds issue, because our staff will be involved working with the treasurer going forward on the same issue. Do you want to comment on that, Chris? Identify yourself for the record, please.
Chris Ferguson, Department of Finance. Ultimately, the most valuable information we need to know as the bond pool and is what to assign it to in terms of the bond, whether it be Proposition 55, 47, or 1D. That would be the most valuable information for us to make our decisions in terms of the sales, so that we can notify the treasurer that we need that certain percentage allocated to that particular bond. So in that fashion, that information would be the most useful. Past that, the allocations between the various entities, be it transportation, watershed projects, school projects, are made by another unit within the Department of Finance. So I can't comment on how the percentages would be broken out between the various entities. I can only comment for the need for information to distribute it between the various bonds.
Okay, so I can comment on that a little bit. I'm going to take off my hat as chairman of the board and put on my hat now as chief deputy director of finance. The unit that Chris is referring to is our capital outlay unit, of which Karen Finn is our program budget manager. And so I would think that any communication to the Department of Finance could cover a couple of bases. I think it could be addressed to both Ms. Oropeza, who's our program budget manager of the education area. It would be helpful to provide the information that Mr. Ferguson has identified. And it could also be addressed to Ms. Finn, who has a broader role to play, which is to look at all of the public works bonds, schools, transportation, water, environmental, so on and so forth. And we could cover both bases. Now I'm putting my hat back on as chair of this committee.
I would appreciate that, because as advocates we can do that. But that advocacy doesn't have the same type of weight as a formal state agency, such as the State Allocation Board and the Office of Public School Construction, providing that information to other state agencies.
Well, it sounds like you've got support. Let's hear from Mr. Harvey.
I certainly have no major issue with it. I don't want to sound like they're curmudgeon, which I think I may be becoming in this meeting, but I've only got two concerns, and I really like Mr. Ferguson did to narrow what it is we're going to do and the kind of information we're going to pass on, because what I didn't want was direction to OPSC staff to become advocates for scheduling bond sales with the treasurer and the controller to mean that Rob had to go out and hire an expert, because I don't think that's part of our core mission. And besides saying fund schools first, always, I don't know what else we say. So I kind of like the refinement about the kinds of information we're going to do. And I certainly don't want to get into that area where if we start saying this is going to be happening, that we create some unintended liability because we're telling people we think there's going to be a scheduled sale. Now you can begin to line up your contracts. Get ready, here it comes, choo-choo's on its way, and then whoop, it doesn't happen. So the less we talk in terms of when things are going to be scheduled, and we advise people to gear up accordingly, but we talk in terms of fund schools first and take it from this fund or that fund, I'm much more comfortable.
And I appreciate that, and the other piece of it is more than simply fund schools first. It's we are able to process so much in this particular period of time because there are also the process issues of apportionment along the way as far as how much can you get out and how much can you release in a particular period of time, which is also valuable information for the treasurer. So the treasurer is not indebting the state on money that may not be able to be apportioned because of the nature of how much is in front of the board and how much is on the workload list.
We should let staff do what they do. Get the money out. Don't have them out being advocates. Come on, Dave.
Well, not advocates, just providing information. As far as getting the money out, that becomes a second piece, which may not be eligible for the September, but for the October agenda, is a request for a review of the regulations on fund release. The bids people have for projects right now are past the amount of time that they're good for. People are going to have to start going out for bids again. To the extent that when bonds are sold and people know that there's an eligibility fund release, if they have to go out for bid again and then go through the fund release process, that may delay the stimulative effect of infrastructure projects.
I'm sorry, could you say that again, Dave?
Okay.
What you just said.
School districts who have projects, if they have gone out to bid on those projects but not awarded contracts because of the funding freezes, the people who made those bids, they're usually 60 or 90-day bids. Since we have been in this situation for more than 60 to 90 days, almost any bid somebody has received is no longer valid and they'll have to go back out again. So let's say we know that we have the ability to do fund releases for all of the current December. So there's no question of whether I'm going to be in front of the line or at the end of the line. We have another $400 million. Those projects probably cannot go out online until you have a new series of bids coming back into the state for a fund release. But if we redefine the necessity of how much under contract before fund release and when you can be under contract, potentially districts can save 3 months for having a project go out under contract and start having the stimulative effect of an infrastructure project. Asking that on the October board to be scheduled for a review of the current regulation on the requirement to be 50% under contract prior to a fund release.
This is the same issue that Mr. Duffy's been bringing to us, correct?
It's the same issue as Mr. Duffy has been referring. It becomes more important as we have longer and longer in the process before projects can have fund releases.
You want us to revisit? You'd like us to revisit that issue?
Revisit the issue.
Okay. What else?
That's it.
Okay. Well, listen, that's very helpful to have your comments, and I appreciate you sticking around to do that. Do we have anyone else from the public that would like to comment on the reports that Ms. Silverman presented? I'm sorry? Rob, go ahead.
Just to the issues associated with communicating the needs for the bonds, we do that all the time with the Treasurer's Office and Department of Finance and have been since the freeze. Prior to that, the process was very different. We, did our work with the Pooled Money Investment Board and scheduling loans. But since the December 17th, we've been joined at the hip with, on these things. So this isn't anything new. It's what we do. Yeah,
well, that's good, and I'm glad that you clarified that, but I don't think it hurts to have the State Allocation Board as a separate entity weighing in with the Treasurer. I mean, obviously, you and your staff work closely with the treasurer on this issue. But I don't think it hurts to have them hear directly from the board. Right?
No, it certainly doesn't.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Anything else? All right. Rob, are there any other reports that we missed that we could take care of real quick to get them off the calendar while you have Mr. Harvey and Ms. Moore here?
We have a report on unfunded, well, the unfunded approvals list.
Which item is that, Juan?
It's
Tab 23.
I'm sorry?
Tab 23.
Okay.
This is just an informational.
This is about all I've got energy left for.
Well, I do know that there is someone that probably does want tab 24 to be taken up, so.
Which one is that?
That's the emergency repair program. So we can do that. Someone probably traveled for this.
Okay, then what was 20, okay, then what was 23? Is there anybody that traveled here, is there anybody that traveled from out of town today for number 23? If there is, just stand up and scream. All right, I don't see anybody, but there was somebody that did miss more for number 24?
I believe so, and also, I have some comments on it, so.
Okay, so then why don't we go to number 24?
Masha Lutzuk will present number 24.
Thank you. And I'd also, I know in addition to the public, we're going to also want to hear from the Department of Finance on item number 24.
Okay, so my presentation is going to be about 2 seconds, and that is just to update the board on the movement of approvals for the emergency repair program. We're presenting $12 million, and the board has approved as part of the consent agenda $12 million for ERP projects, which leaves us with about $13 million on the balance on the status of funds to provide next month to eligible projects. Thank you.
Okay, Finance. Please identify yourself for the record.
Chris Ferguson, Department of Finance. I'm responding to the board's request for information related to the ERP program from last month.
Thank
Effectively, there's $51 million that hasn't been transferred, to our knowledge, that has not been transferred to the ERP account from the reversion account. We know on the 2009-10 Budget Act that the legislature clearly indicated that there would not be providing any funding to ERP in the 2009-10 year. We do know, however, in the 2008-9 year that we're working with the legislative staff to attempt to provide additional funds towards that $51 million in terms of getting more into the ERP program. So Finance is working with legislative staff to attempt to reconcile that.
Okay, I appreciate that. Now, Mr. Ferguson, stay available because I think we may need you for some more feedback. Mr. Hancock, did you want to weigh in on this?
Yes, thank you. I didn't travel from out of town, but I'd be glad to speak on it and appreciate the opportunity. It's Bruce Hancock, Gunnison Park. Thank you very much, Mr. Sheehy, for causing this to be brought back again.
Absolutely.
I think it's definitely a subject worthy of exploration by the board, and I do want to remind you that I sent you some information on the history of the funding for the emergency repair program in a letter that you probably received in the last couple of days, and I won't go back through that. I hope what the letter showed you was one thing, that the history of the funding of the program has been odd, to say the least. We started out with a very clear settlement, the Williams settlement, that was codified, put into law. And based on that, school districts, consultants, architects, engineers went to the process of filing for making application for that money. But there is when you begin to look at the funding history, there is really a strange situation that you find. In spite of the fact that that settlement and the original law that codified it called for a minimum of $100 million a year, the amount of funding that's available to the program today is exactly, to the dollar, the amount of money that was available to the funding in 2006. In other words, we've had 3 intervening years in which the original law and the original settlement called for $100 million each year, in which we have netted nothing. If the Williams settlement and the laws that had been...
I'm sorry, you lost me on that. You said that the funding stayed exactly the same for the last 3 years, and that was zero?
No, not zero. The amount of funding that has been available to the program in 2006 was $338 million.
Right.
The amount of funding that is available to the program, has been made available to the program today is $338 million.
Oh, that's a good thing, right?
No, that's a bad thing because there were 3 intervening years, fiscal years, 3 subsequent fiscal years in which there should have been, under the terms of the original settlement, an additional $100 million each year.
So you're saying that we're short $300 million?
Yes, exactly.
Well, I'll tell you what. Why don't you figure out where we can get that $300 million and come back and make a recommendation?
You know, as I've looked into this question, Mr. Sheehy, I've run into that response really a number of times. I mean, most folks are too polite to ask me about what part of fiscal crisis I don't understand, and I see you're not afraid to ask. I think I do understand it, and I'm not dwelling on the past. What I hope to do is ask the board to look at the history of the program with an eye toward the future. I don't know where the funding is going to come from. I know what the law says, and I did, in fact, misinform this board last time I spoke when I indicated that I thought there might be other options for the funding other than the Prop 98 reversion account. I find in rereading the language of the law that it really is very clear that the funding does come from that account. However, there is also a section in that law that says the legislature may put into the emergency repair program any other one-time funds from the Prop 98, from Prop 98 funds, period.
Right.
Frankly, I don't really know what that means. What I do know, though, beyond that there is a fiscal crisis, is that there were laws written and settlements made which many people relied on. Those settlements and those laws were for work to be done at the lowest performing and frankly, some of the worst schools in California. And we find it stopped. Yes, I understand. There are many things that are stopped. But I hope that the board will continue to look into this. And I appreciate very much the comment from Finance that they are looking at, getting the rest of the 2008 funding, which 50% of it has not been made available. That will be a big help. But there is still remaining then another approximately $400 million. Not all of it should have been due at this time, although one could probably make the argument that under the original settlement it should have been all made available by this time. But I don't think anyone actually expected that.
Right.
But if we could continue to try to move forward on future funding to the degree that it's at all possible, there's one thing to keep in mind too, and I know that you juggle many, many issues, but these are shovel-ready projects in almost every case. Actually, most of them are pretty small projects, many not requiring DSA approval. My point there is that these projects can go out on the street. They can put people to work as well as fix very needy schools. So I really do appreciate your taking the time to listen to this.
Mr. Hancock, I just want you to know I did ask you the question somewhat tongue-in-cheek, and I appreciate very much your attitude and your sense of humor. You didn't get offended, and I appreciate that. And I'm glad that you recognize the seriousness, the unprecedented seriousness of the fiscal calamity we find ourselves in. And I just want you to know I do appreciate you coming before us and making your case. It's the right thing for you to do, and I'm glad that you also appreciate the terrible situation we find ourselves in. Did you want to hear anything from Finance? Did you want to respond, Chris, on anything?
Well, Chris Ferguson, Finance again. I'd just like to reiterate that the administration is still committed to providing the $800 million as it becomes available, as we're able to. So we are still committed to that $800 million, and I'd just like to state that.
Yeah, okay. Did you want to give us a schedule on when we're going to appropriate it, Chris?
We'll be sure to work with legislative staff on that one.
Okay, good to know.
Can we just summarize, however, so this year, we have a $51 million, we have a $101 million appropriation, of which we have $51 million to go in fiscal 08-09. And of that amount, I am aware that in July, the department transferred $17.7 million from the reversion account, and I've been told that's probably the end of the reversion account for 08-09. And that has to be confirmed, and I think you're looking at that, and we'll do so over the next few weeks. So that issue could be down to around a $34 million issue for fiscal year 08-09. And I heard that the administration and finance are committed to, and the legislature are looking at the solution for that $34 million. I think that's the short-term issue. The longer-term issue is, one, this next year we have not appropriated for this program in the Budget Act. Is that true?
Correct. The legislature did not appropriate any funds.
So we have a year of no funds for next year, and that we need to fiscally, heard that the administration is committed to the $800 million, of which we're about $338 right now of the $800 through. I would support also, and the department supports, looking at what we can do over this next year for the following budget year as we deal with the crisis. Because I, too, support, I think it is at our most vulnerable schools that these repairs, and they were to be emergency repairs, are occurring, and that they're very important in the whole system of our school building program.
And I'd like to follow up with one more question to finance. Chris, that 800, that's outside of the 98, right?
Correct. That's outside of the 98.
All right. Good to know. Mr. Harvey?
I just have a quick question to staff. I'm intrigued by three words in your staff comments where you talk about the 338, and we've been able to supplement it with $5 million from project savings, and then the magic words are, and other sources. I thought I heard Mr. Hancock say that we were limited to this reversion area account to feed it. If we have other sources, I certainly would aggressively support going after them for all the reasons that Ms. Moore commented on. I think this is an area where you're dealing with vulnerable, emergency, horrible problems, and they are project ready, so the more we can fund this, I don't care where the dollars come from.
How about the service revolving fund, Scott?
Certainly.
I think
okay, that was an inside joke. That's the fund that supports general services. That was just a little. He said he didn't care where it came from.
I just want to know, what are the other sources? I mean, where else can we get this money?
I'd be glad to clarify, and we did not extrapolate on that in the item for sake of simplicity. There was another funding source that was available in the past that is no longer available, and that is the School Facilities Needs Assessment Grant Program, which was implemented as part of Williams' settlement legislation. It provided funding to school districts to do an inventory and assessment of facilities. There were some savings from that program. There was some money that wasn't originally allocated, and then there were some savings too that came back. So there was several board action items in the past where we recouped money from that program to put into the ERP, but that funding source is no longer available.
And this is a legislatively directed fund. I'm going to assume for a moment that we cannot fund it with any bond overage or savings. Or can we?
No, that's correct. It is a Prop 98 reversion account funded program, basically general fund.
And that means we're out, kaput, nothing more, because this other fund that had been available has gone away. Therefore, there is absolutely being as creative as we want to be. You were wonderful in talking about this credit line. There's no other way we can find money to help this program.
Mr. Harvey, I don't really know what this means. I only know what the law says. There is a paragraph. It's right where the regular funding that we're discussing is talked about. And it says, it's very short, the legislature may transfer to the school facilities emergency repair account other one-time Proposition 98 funds except funds specified pursuant to, and I believe that exception is funding $150 million a year for the minimum funding obligation that the state.
That's the legislature. I don't want to rely on them. I want to do it here.
I would like to ask finance a question, though. Is it, were the districts able to spend the money that we actually have appropriated, or did it sit around? They spend it right away? What's happened to the $338 million that we've actually appropriated for this settlement?
That would actually be most appropriate to defer to OPSC, but what typically occurs is the items that they bring forth, like in this month, $12.1 million, they're notifying the board of the additional projects that are being funded using ERP funds.
I want to know about the $338 we've appropriated, Rob. Have the districts been able to spend it, or has that money been sitting around?
If I may address, out of $338 million that has been made available by the legislature, $330 million has been provided, including the August agenda items, for eligible projects. So that leaves $8 million. But since we had additional $5 million available from the needs assessment and ERP project savings, that leaves $13 million in the status of funds. And the fund releases for this program are automatic. So in about 3 weeks from now, the districts that were approved for funding this month, cumulative $12 million, will receive their checks to do their projects.
I don't know if my question got answered. Did the $338 that's been appropriated, has it been spent in the districts? No.
330 of it.
Mr. Hancock is shaking his head no.
I'm sorry, I can let Masha answer. She's absolutely correct, of course. Almost all of it has been allocated to districts except a few million dollars. You should know, though, too.
What does that mean, though? I mean, it's been allocated. They actually come in to get the money?
It's automatic fund release.
It's automatic fund release, and then a district has 12 or 18 months, depending if they need DSA approval to complete the project and spend the money. So
automatic fund release. So let me ask the question a different way. Of the $330 million that's been released, how much of that's been liquidated? Or how much of that is still sitting around in an account at the local level?
I personally couldn't answer that, Mr. Chief.
I'm asking the question because I suspect the legislature, and I could be wrong, but I suspect that one of the rationales that the legislature used for not appropriating more money at this point, above and beyond the obvious thing, which is the state was one click away from bankruptcy, is that this money was being allocated at the local level and not being liquidated, that it was sitting in an account.
Who provided that information?
I'm not saying anybody's provided that information. I'm just betting that that was one of the things that happened. I was wondering if anybody here could address that point, and I could be completely wrong. I'm sorry, sir, did you want to bring...
Yeah, I can introduce myself. My name is Brooks Allen. I'm a staff attorney with the ACLU Foundation of Southern California.
I'm sorry, you're the staff attorney with the ACLU Foundation
of Southern California.
Of Southern
Part
California.
of the lawsuit, right?
I was, and we helped represent the plaintiffs in the Williams versus California action, and I've served as their implementation attorney ever since the case was first settled. Quickly, I've had the pleasure of working both with the board, Office of Public School Construction, Department of Education, and others as we've rolled these pieces out. I can speak a little bit to the history of the funding, if that's the piece of the question. Directly to your point, I want to just point out that this program started as a reimbursement-only program. So that is, the districts would have spent the funds before they actually received them from OPSC. So as far as these funds being spent, in many cases, especially before it became a grant program, in addition to being reimbursement, those funds were spent and simply the accounts were reimbursed with the emergency repair program dollars.
But when I hear them say that it's an automatic, how'd you put it, automatic
fund release?
Automatic fund release doesn't mean it's being done on a reimbursed basis.
Right. Now the program allows for both grant funding, which is upfront project funded, and reimbursement. So we continue to do both.
So I know how the legislature works. So,
and to a certain extent, I think I can speak to speculate legislative intent, but as we've worked with the administration and all parties to the lawsuit and working this through every year, part of what came up with funding is in the early years when it was a reimbursement-only program. There was a great deal of effort, Office of Public School Construction, ourselves, other folks, CASH, trying to get interest in the program, and folks were slow to embrace it. So you saw a low level of application activity, and I think the legislature looked at that. They saw funds sitting there.
So there was a bunch of money appropriated. Well, when you say the early years, it's only been how many?
5 years.
When was the first appropriation made?
Settlement was, there was $5 million immediately at the time of the settlement was signed, September 29th.
Well, if it was 0506, it hasn't been 5 years.
The settlement was reached on September 29th of 04. And at that time, there was $5 million that was set aside in the emergency program right away. It took some time for the regulations to make their way through. And
then
the next
how much
year
money
when
was
we had-
appropriated the next year?
It was over $100 million. I forget the specific figure. I'd have
But
to-
that money didn't get drawn down very quick, did it?
No, it didn't.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm saying that's what happened in terms of, if you look at the funding history,
Yeah.
legislature saw money sitting
So
there.
I suspect that that's part of the story here, that as I suspect it, that there was money appropriated on the front end and it sat there, and you've confirmed that. That doesn't mean that it changes our obligation or that we're not supporting getting all the money out there, but I think that the legislature also, plays a role in how the money gets appropriated. And when they saw that a lot of money sat there in the beginning, they may have looked at that when they were looking at all the other hard choices before them and thought, well, maybe they don't need all the money right now.
But at this time, don't we have projects in-house up to the $800 million amount?
Over, yeah.
Yes, so we have projects out there. We're oversubscribed in this program that it's unfunded for next year.
Yes. And my central point in why I traveled up here today was to thank both the board, OPSC, and others who have raised this issue for the attention to it, because, of course, we've been trying to bring attention to the emergency repair program since its inception, and we're glad that folks are monitoring it and trying to make sure we can reach that $100 million figure, and are confident that working with all parties to the settlement, the administration, we're going to get there, recognizing, obviously, the fiscal realities in this current year, and look forward to working with everyone as we do that.
Well, thank you. And I just want to say, myself, I really appreciate your comments that you too recognize the situation we're in. We appreciate it, and as Mr. Ferguson said, we are certainly going to do everything we can to meet our obligations under the settlement agreement you reached, and we just appreciate your understanding at a time when we're one click away from bankruptcy. Was there more comment, more testimony on this item, or can we move on? Okay. All right, so we've heard item 24. I think at this point, unless there's some burning reason not to, we're going to adjourn this meeting because I know my colleagues and I are pooped, and I'm sure the audience. There's more public comment. Please come forward. Sorry about that. I wasn't trying to cut you off.
Thank you very much. Richard Gonzalez and Associates, and I apologize. I only take a few seconds here. I am unaware of the outcome of the second motion by Senator Hancock as to whether that was passed or not.
Ms. Isaac?
Yes, sir.
It passed.
Thank you very much.
The sixth vote was provided by Assemblymember Brownlee.
Thank you.
When she came back in the room right at the end of the closed session.
For the sake of expediency and rather than rolling over an item, if the report on the unfunded approvals can just be accepted without...
Unfunded what?
On the unfunded approvals, item number 23, if we can just accept...
Does anybody object to us just accepting that? Let's do that.
Okay.
Hearing no objection. Anything else, Rob?
No, that's it.
Okay, everybody that participated today, thank you very much. And for those of you that didn't come forward to speak, thank you even more. The State Allocation Board is adjourned.
We went through every item, didn't we?